first of all, I would like to impress upon you that the Indians play a very special role. Number one, they are the eldest of brothers. Number two, they are the keepers, as you will learn later on, of the arcane secrets. What was once in the hands of others, whether it be the Lemurians, the Atlanteans, or whether it be the Sumerians or whoever, the key atomic role lies with the Aboriginal and Indian peoples of today. And we don't know that as common rote or in fact, but when you begin to work with them and you begin to channel things which pertain to them, you soon learn that they are a very, very special peoples in our midst. Now, I heard a great deal of laughter before we convened today, and so I'd like to follow that by telling a joke, you know. And I think the one that I'd like to tell would be the one about the widow. And the story, some of you have heard it, but I think it's a classic, and I see Sonia smiling already, you know. But it's one I tell in Europe. It's one that the Germans can accept, whereas others, you know, they fall flat. This lady had lost her husband of some 25 years, and of course, in that type of relationship, there was a great loss in terms of companionship and all the other things that they had shared. And so she was totally, after he died, she was still totally in love with him. And so she had a ritual. And each rainy, stormy day, she loved to go up to the attic and take her favorite cat with her, and that was her sole companion as of this time because her husband had died. And she'd take her favorite cat and go to the attic, lay him down on a very special cushion, you know, and let him nap, and then she would go through a steamer trunk. Now, she knew everything that was in the trunk, item-wise, but it was always a great pleasure to take each and every item and to bring back fond memories associated with that particular trinket or item. So she did the customary thing this one very stormy, rainy day, and finally she got down to the bottom of the trunk, and lo and behold, there was something different there, and she reached in and she got it, and it was a silver chalice. And she says, well, I don't remember that. I wonder where that came from. And about that time, out jumped the genie. And, of course, it startled her. And he says, madam, you have 3 wishes. And he said, quickly now, 3 wishes. Your first wish, madam. She thought for a while. And she said, well, I'd like to be independently wealthy so I never have to worry about finances again. Bang, granted. She had it. Number 2, madam. She thought for a moment. She said, I'd like to be 26 years old again. I'd like to be alluring, sexy, and all the things that go with being 26 years old. Instantaneously, it was granted. And he said, number 3, madam. And she thought for a while, and she couldn't really come up with something. And finally, she spied the cat sleeping very peaceably, of course, upon the cushion. Now, she loved that cat so much. And they had such a unique relationship. The bright idea came to her that perhaps she could have him changed into a handsome, charming, you know, stalwart prince. And that was her wish. And he looked at it, the genie looked at it quickly, he said, granted, madam, and bang, there he stood. He was the most gorgeous thing that she had ever seen. Now, she programmed it, but the programming went far beyond her own expectations. And so she was in the distance, and of course he was over here. And they began to walk towards one another. Now realize she's 26 years old and he's about the same age, and there's such a magnetic pull between them, you see. And so they very lovingly approached one another, and finally they came to the proximity of one another where they could embrace, and indeed they did. They embraced warmly and lovely and so forth, and they kissed and did all the things that prenuptials might do, you know, because it was going to be a marriage. And finally it got to the state where she was so amorous and so was he that they could hardly contain themselves. And so he at that point leaned down and he whispered very gently in her ears, aren't you sorry you have me neutered? What a shock, huh? I always thought that was a cute joke. Well, today we're going to range far and wide in terms of the Indians. I do want you to remember the 2 key note factors I threw out there to begin with. Number one, that the Indians are the eldest of brothers, and number two, they are the keepers of the arcane secrets, and along with that, in the same vein, they are the spiritual leaders of the future. As our story progresses today, and much of this, incidentally, you'll find on my tapes back there, the album on the Indians, but as our story progresses today, you'll see where they inherited all the things that other races may have had in the past. In the final resolution, though, it was given to them, and they have it even today. Now, many people ask me how it was that I became involved with the Indians. And I have to tell you, kicking and screaming, because that's just the way I got on the path, too. It was not an easy thing for me. I was told many, many times that I should be on the path, but I was totally resistant to it and did not want to be a part of that flaky business. And being a retired military man, of course, I'm rather pragmatic in many matters. And I wasn't too sure it was the thing for me to do. But nonetheless, I told part of the story yesterday, and I would like to tell you how I became interested and on the path of the Indians in all my research. It happened in the early 70s, 1971, in a place called Tampa, Florida. I was a businessman there at the height of success when I had an awakening, which had to do, as I told you yesterday, those of you who were here, with the rising of the Kundalini. And as I always say, even today, I do not fully understand what the Kundalini is all about. All I know is what I've read and what I have personally experienced, and I would tell you this, that the experience I had, I would not wish on anybody, because mine was a traumatic experience, a near death, and it's a miracle that I wasn't killed, before it all ended. The story began with the rising of the Kundalini, and shortly thereafter, a woman in Sacramento, California, was told by Spirit that there was a man over 3,000 miles away in Tampa, Florida, that needed to be placed on the path. And it was her assignment to put me on the path. Her name was Reverend Peggy York. Now, Reverend Peggy York was a former Department of Army civilian who had worked with the headquarters in Vietnam. It was Peggy York who spared us the great, what could have been an adversity when we had the Tan Son Nhut escapade. In other words, she was the one who told the commanding general that the Tan Son Nhut thing was to happen. Now, in the early days, when Peggy would say something is going to happen, they would all laugh at her. And she says, I just know it's going to happen this way. I saw it last night. I think you better do this and you better do that. And people characteristically, of course, continued to laugh at her. But what happened was, with regularity, everything that she said came to pass. So pretty soon they began to listen to her, and they pulled her up to the highest of position in the general's commanding staff, and she was to monitor all of Vietnam, which she did. So many of the things which the Viet Cong had planned, including the Tan Son Nhut raid, was already known by Peggy, and she told the forces, our allied forces there, that these things were about to happen. When the Viet Cong hit Tan Son Nhut, and I was there at that time, when they hit Tan Son Nhut, they didn't find anything but mock-ups of what once was planes and other things, of course, which were essential to the program in overall Vietnam. She had done this for quite some time, and finally her tenure with the government expired, and she decided she wanted out of it. She wasn't going to do it anymore. So she came back to the United States, became then an ordained minister, opened up her own church in Sacramento, California, and began to do the Lord's work. And it was during that time that Peggy was told to go find this man on the East Coast. As I've already said, that man was me. What happened was she didn't know how to find me, and I don't think I would have either. But what she did, she staged an exhibition that had to do with psychometry. And she rented a large hotel ballroom capable of holding about 600 people, and she drew about 350 people that day. And these people were all in the audience, and she was up on a stage like this is the stage where I am, and there's a set of steps to the right and a set of steps to the left, and what people did, they came up on stage in front of her, crossed in front of her, And as they did so, they would hand her an object, whether it be a fountain pen or a wristwatch or a ring or whatever, And Peggy was fantastic, She'd put that up to her eye, and right away she would give them a message of import. So that, it was mind-boggling because every one of them was right on target. I mean, there are two of the most memorable incidents that I remember is that one man, a businessman, of course, handed her his fountain pen, and she put it up to her third eye. And without even thinking, she said, "I see you have an affair with your secretary." Well, his wife was in the audience. And then another case, as I said yesterday, there was another woman who was having an illegal affair, in other words, out of marriage affair. And she also commented on that, and her husband was in the audience. And that woman fainted. Well, she did several other things which were just spectacular and outstanding. Now, preceding all of this, she still didn't know who I was up to the point that I made myself known. Preceding her, she had with her what is known as a Kundalini healer. I've never seen one since and probably will never see another. But his Kundalini was perpetually on. He couldn't turn it off. And boy, I'll tell you what, after I had my experience, my heart went out to him, really. But he was perpetually in a state of ecstasy and power with his Kundalini. And so what he did, he invited people up to the stage to demonstrate to them the power of the Kundalini. And as he would have a person sit before him, he would no sooner touch into the person's aura, and that person would go inert, like this. You've seen the hypnosis sessions like this. Well, he could do the same thing by touching your aura. And then he could take his hands touching the aura, and he could pull or push that person back and forth without touching the physical body. All he was using, of course, was the auric emanation from the person itself, that electromagnetic body which surrounds the body. That was quite demonstrable, and it was very impressive. And then I heard some damn fool stand up and say, "You can't do that to me," or I didn't know he stood up, but he said, "You can't do that to me." And when I turned to look around, I realized I was standing up, and it was me who had said it. And I'll tell you what, I couldn't sit down fast enough, but before I could, he said, "Young man, get up here." And it was too late to sit down and what have you, and of course I did go up the stage. He did his very best to affect me as he had the others, but sure enough, he couldn't do it. But I will tell you, even to this day, it's the most powerful force I've ever felt coming from another human being. Each time he would move his hands through my aura, in the proximity of my body, I could feel my blood course and pull. When he would get up around my head, it felt like my head was going to explode. And yet, I could still negate that energy, and I could hold my own. Finally, it was he who collapsed, and he said, "You're right, I can't do it to you." Peggy then, she was observing all this. Peggy then told me later that she knew then that I was the man that she had been looking for, and Spirit had used him and some other assistants, which were my Indian guides, to locate me and point me out. She told me later on that when I stood up, I had no idea I was going to do it. And I had no idea I was going to challenge this guy, But the 6 Indian guides I had behind me were responsible for this, And they programmed in my mind to stand up and challenge him. And as she was very clairvoyant. She saw the 6 Indian guides and says, that's the man. So that's how she found me and recognized me. Now later on, after the whole thing was over with, she was giving readings, consultations, and they were 20 minutes of duration. They were $25. Now back in 1971, 71, somewhere in there, $25 was a lot of money for a reading. And I said, I'll be darned if I'm going to pay $25 for 20 minutes and what have you. So I was rather hump about the whole thing, So as soon as it ended, I went in outside, jumped in my Grand Prix, and drove back to my apartment and was very smug and satisfied with myself. And as I turned off the ignition key, a voice spoke to me, and it's the first time Spirit had ever spoken to me. It said, "You get back there. Go back there." And I said, in my truculent way, Aries and what have you, I said, "Buzz off." Just like I'd been talking to Spirit all my life. Nonetheless, I said, "Buzz off." But they were persistent. So then I remembered that probably after I left there, out of 350 people, 25 or 30 slots at the most, they'd all be taken. So I returned thinking, that I would have the last word, that when I got back there, it would be totally filled and I'd be home free. It didn't work that way. When I got back there, the last slot was empty, and so I was committed. And at the same time, I was furious. I also had tongue-in-cheek about the whole thing. Nonetheless, what was supposed to be 20 minutes ended up being 5.5 hours of reading. And basically, this is where I became involved with the Indians and how it happened. We talked and talked and talked, and she told me about my future and what I was supposed to do, and the whole thing, of course, oriented in and around the Indians. About halfway through, she said, let's take a break, and the Kundalini healer was in the room with us in a hotel room, and we took a break, and all of a sudden she wheeled around to me, and she says, my God, you have a bad stomach, don't you? And I said, yes, I do. She said, what happened? I said, well, the Kundalini came up the wrong way and scalded me, and I said, I'm still in great pain, and it has yet to heal. And so she thought for a moment. She looked above my head, beyond me back here, and I could see that she was talking to somebody, and she nodded, and she said, they said that you are to eat grass. And I laughed because I could see myself down on all fours, munching like a cow, and to me it was ludicrous. And then, of course, she admonished me, and she said, no, dummy, you go to the health food store and you get yourself alfalfa tablets, get on that regime, and she said, in very short order, it will clear up. By golly, she was right, because I later did it, and within 2 months, I was back on solid foods again. Up to that time, I was on baby pablum, and anything, applesauce, anything that was soft. I couldn't digest more than that because my stomach was so internally ulcerated that I couldn't eat anything without it sticking within the lining of my intestines, and then later ulcerating, and then perforating, and then peritonitis had set in. It's a wonder I didn't die. But it was a great pain. I would not wish it upon anybody. But I guess you would have to say, too, it was my initiation, because I had been reluctant, to listen to Spirit, although I was always in commune with God. I was always very intuitive. I can remember in combat, many times I would smell out an ambush. I knew where they were. I knew the imminence of it and what have you. And I knew how to avoid it, of course, and saved my life many times. So I did have the innate abilities, which were, of course, requisites and prerequisites for the spiritual path. What I had to do, though, was to get on the path and begin to practice these, and she was the instrument who, of course, put me on that path. Now, the story that she told me at that time in the final analysis, she says, here is what's in store for you, and this is what you must do. Number one, she said, you must resign from your current organization. Number two, you must give up everything you own. And number three, you're to go out west and you are to work with the Indians. And I said very kindly to her, I said, lady, you are out of your tree. Words to that effect. Because here I was at the height of my business. Everything was peaches and cream. I'd never been so comfortable in all my life. I was in power. I was in control. I had unlimited resources at my disposal in terms of monies and everything else. And this woman's telling me to give everything up such as that and go out and work with the heathens. And so I flatly refused. She wouldn't take no for an answer, though. And she said at that point, she said, well, I'm going to tell you what they're telling me to tell you, and what you do with it's entirely up to you. She said, in 90 days, you must give up that organization. You must give up everything you own and go out into the southwest United States. You'll be told where to go once you get out there. Find your teacher and get involved with the Indians. And she said, if you don't, now she said, if you do it correctly, and as you're destined to do, when you get out to the southwest United States, you will find an old Indian shaman who will befriend you and who will guide you and help you bridge the two cultures and do the things that you're supposed to do. But if you do not get out there in 90 days, and she was firm about this, 90 days, 3 months, if you do not, he will be superseded by a very evil man who will be a sorcerer, and he's going to kill you or try to kill you. and it's doubtful whether you can survive if he tries to do this. So, again, I resisted, and I told her no way was I going to do this. Finally, she wrapped the whole thing up, and she left. And I've never seen her since then. Never have I seen her again. We corresponded a couple times. I talked to her one time by telephone, but I've never seen her in person again. I thought about it and thought about it. I talked to my wife about it and what have you. And, of course, she felt like I did. It was ridiculous, that I should do this, give up everything I owned, and on a promissory type of thing, go out west and seek out one man and spend the rest of my life working with the Indians. Now, she also said that I was to document the spirituality of the Indians. Now, can you, just in your own mind, can you comprehend what an intense and a job of magnitude that is? It's impossible, basically, because every one of them basically has a different, although they have one common belief system, they practice it basically in many different ways. I have done it since then. But when I first started out, it was a nigh impossibility. I didn't see how I could possibly do it. Nonetheless, I talked it over with my wife, and you know what? Finally, it began to sink in. There's something to what she said. The trouble was, though, I didn't make up my mind soon enough, and I ended up out here in Arizona, finally where I came, at the end of 4 months as opposed to 3 months. And then I'm scrambling, searching, of course, for the old Indian that I'm supposed to meet. I was sitting in Wickenburg, got as far as Wickenburg before I came into Phoenix, and I took a couple weeks over there, went out in the desert and meditated and talked and all the things I was supposed to do. And finally I was told that the tribe that I was to work with was called the Papa something, and I couldn't quite get the name. And later on, of course, I found out it was the Papagos, down near the Mexican border. And so I then moved to Phoenix. I set up headquarters there, and I began to go south looking for the Papagos. And later I found what I wanted. It was in a place called Sells, Arizona, straight up from Ajo, very near the Mexican border. And when I found where I was supposed to go, I didn't know how to approach the people themselves, the Indians themselves, the chief and the medicine man, to find out who it was I was to work with. What happened is, and is always the case, Spirit has a divine way of causing all things to come to pass. And so this one Sunday, I drove down there still trying to find a way to interface with them. And I parked the car and decided to go for a hike and go up on a promontory which overlooked the whole village down below me, and to study it with field glasses, get a feel for the whole thing and so forth. When I got up there, I hadn't been there more than maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and I realized that I was being shadowed. There was someone following me. And they would skulk and they would hide behind rocks every time I would turn around. I said, "Oh, brother." And, of course, I didn't know who it was or what to think. And I wasn't really apprehensive, but I was curious as to why they were skulking and tailing me and what their intentions were. Now, I'm down there all by myself, the only white man. I knew this was sacred territory I was in because there was a lot of burials up there, and other sacred Indian rituals and so forth were evident in the area. So I was treating it with great respect, but nonetheless, there was a possibility that I might violate something, and I could draw violence into myself. And I felt that these people were watching me very closely to see if that was the case. What happened was I tired of this, and finally I said, "Look, I'm going to bring this thing to a head." So I found an open area, and I sat down on a rock, and I said, "Well, whoever you are, come on out and talk to me. I'm not going to be moving anymore. You need to interface with me. I want to know what you're doing. What do you want of me?" So I sat there and waited, and finally, out from the cover broke a dog. And then right behind him was another dog. And these two dogs came bounding up to me. They licked my face, like I'd been their master for many years, and we had a joyous reunion. At that point, 4 little children stood up from behind the rocks, and the dogs, of course, belonged to them. And when the dogs accepted me and licked my face and everything, they knew that I was okay, and so they came out of hiding and, of course, joined the dogs and me, and we had a very lovely afternoon together. They took me around and showed me all their secret places and what they considered to be sacred and so forth. It was a marvelous afternoon. Now, as spirit would have it, one of the young men was the chief's son, the very man I was looking for. And I'll never forget his name. He'd be about 16 years old now, I guess. His name was Abraham. His father's name was Elliot. Unlikely name for an Indian, because they had their Indian names too, but they also had their Christian names. So Abraham turns out to be the chief's son. Well, we stayed in this area until it was after dark. And I was concerned because I felt that the parents would be worried about the children. What I would do when I would get down there, I would take the back seat out of my Grand Prix, so I had basically an open compartment back there. So I took the children and the dogs, and put them in there and said, I'll take you home. It also gave me a chance to see where the chief lived. So I told Abraham, tell your father, and that was on a Sunday, to tell your father I will be down here next weekend. I wish to talk to him about something very important. And indeed, he did. And I went down and I met with Elliot a week later, the chief, and told him what my mission was, and that was that I was to talk to their medicine man, that he was to help me in my endeavors and so forth. I no sooner said that, medicine man, he said, oh, no. He said, you don't want to do that. And I said, what do you mean I don't want to do it? He said, the man who is now the medicine man for the tribe is very evil. He's a sorcerer. He'll kill you. And he said, I said, what happened to the other man? He told me what happened to the previous chief, not the chief, but medicine man, told me that he had died summarily. And I said, on what date did he die? And he told me, and I tallied it up real quick. You know what? Exactly 90 days. Just as Peggy said, that guy had died. And he was superseded by the one known as Juan Francisco. And now, just as she said, I was faced with a very evil adversary. Well, I said, all right, to Elliot, the chief. I said, I need to work with you first. Let's get our thing done first, and later on I'll consider how we're going to approach Juan Francisco so I can work with your medicine people also. So we did, and finally we got to the point where I said, now I'm ready for your medicine man, and let's see what we can do. And he says, I don't want you to do it. It's too dangerous, and you may get killed. I said, look, I'm sure that he and I can find some common ground in the interest of the betterment of the Indians to work together. He says, I don't think so. And then he began to tell me some of the things this guy could do. For instance, he could become invisible. He would walk around their houses and on the gravel in their driveway and things like that. They could hear his footsteps and go out and look, nobody, And he would be inside their house and he'd knock an object over. And so he terrorized the whole village. And they were all scared to death of him. Not only that, he was violating universal law, particularly in the eyes of the Indians, in that for healings, he was charging, in those days now, this is about 74, somewhere there, $150 for a healing. Indians don't charge for things like that, and yet this guy is charging $150 for healings, and he was becoming a very wealthy man. Well, to make a long story short, I told Elliot, you set it up for next Sunday. I'm coming down here, and you can be a part of it if you want to, or you don't have to be. It's up to you. But I need to talk to him. So he agreed. Next Sunday, I went down there, and no Elliot. So I got to scouting around, and I asked several of the people in the village. But this time, they knew I was there, who I was, what I was trying to do, and so forth, and they were acceptable of me. And they said, well, Elliot thought it was too hot, and so he took his family, and they've all gone to the mountains. And I said, oh, brother. So I said, well, what about Juan Francisco? Where is he? Well, we don't know. He's disappeared for the day. Well, there I was. I'd driven 150 miles to make my rendezvous, and neither one of the people I was to work with was there. So I said, okay. Now, back in those days, you must understand, I was a wild man. I had gone almost totally native. You might say I'd gone to seed. I had hair down around my shoulders. I had a beard down to here. I wore a bandana. I wore a pair of shorts, skimpy shorts, a pair of tennis shoes, and a small backpack and a walking stick. And that was my uniform for all my Indian work and things I did. And even the Indians thought I was crazy. Nonetheless, that day I said, well, all right, I'll make the most of it. I've driven 150 miles. I'm going out in the desert and play for the day. So I did. I went out into the desert. Now, that desert down there gets to be as high as 133 degrees. But, you know, I was so inured to it. I was so accustomed to the heat by then, I could take any heat. Played in the desert all day long, and towards dusk, I began to come back out. And I had taken the car and hidden it under a tree and taken some brush, stacked around it, and concealed it, camouflaged it. And now, in that type of environment, you can hear a car 20 or 30 miles away because the sound is so quiet that even almost a drop of a pin you can hear. And especially down in that area, you know, it's so remote. Well, I had not heard a car for hours. I mean, hours and hours. I walked out. I finally uncovered my car. I got in it, and I'm driving back towards the village. And no sooner did I get on the highway than walking up the highway, this road, it's not a highway, was an old man. Like this, you know. I said, boy. Now, he was 5 miles away from the village. And I said, I wonder where he came from. The nearest village next to, there was a little town, next to Sells itself, was 35 miles away. Now, he either had to walk 35 miles away or from Sells, beg your pardon, Covered Wells, or he walked 5 miles from Sells and was turning around and going back, which would have been 10 miles. Either way, it was remarkable that an old man was going to do this and was doing it. So what I did, I pulled up next to him, and I had electric windows, and I pushed the button, rolled down the window on this side, and said, are you going to the village? He nodded. He didn't speak. And I said, would you like a lift? He said, yes. Nodded his head again. So he opened the door and got in the car. And so just as soon as he did, it was getting a little chilly that time of the evening. I zipped the window back up. He was no sooner in the car with me that I began to feel some strange things. And I said, boy, there's something strange about this. This old man, I wonder who he is. Now, he never looked at me. He kept, at this time, the window was almost opaque. It was a mirror. And he kept looking in the mirror, and I kept feeling him sending me strange energies. And it was as though he had put something inside of me and was really beginning to panic me. And at that point, remember yesterday I was talking to you, and you were asking the question about protecting yourself. I was trying to think of everything I learned in unity from other disciplines and churches and so forth, and I couldn't come up with the first thing in terms of an affirmation of protection, you know. In the meanwhile, this guy's getting into me deeper and deeper, and I realized I was in trouble. So, per usual, any time I'm facing near death or something like that, the only thing I can say is, oh, shit. And when I did that, it broke that hold. My power came back to balance and so forth, and all I did was cover myself with the light, and I was back in control of myself. And I felt much better. I broke his power simultaneously with it. And I said, incidentally, who are you? And then he turned away from the window, and he looked at me, and his teeth were spaced in the front. When this guy grinned at you, it wasn't a grin, it was a leer. He was malevolent. This guy was evil. And he smiled at me, and he says, my name is Juan Francisco. Well, I said, oh, shit, again, you know, because I'd been had. The very guy that I was seeking on my terms got me on his terms, and now we, of course, were adversaries. So I took him back to the village, and we got in the village. I said, would you like me to take you home? And he said, you don't know where I live. I said, oh, yes, I do. I didn't, but I did. So I let the car go. And he lived way out in a remote section of the village itself, Sells. And I pulled up in front of this hut. It was a small hut. And I stopped, and he turned around and looked at me in disbelief, you know. How did I know where he lived? Even I don't know. I just knew by spirit, let spirit guide me, and I pulled right up in front of his house. Well, at that very moment, I was already in bed with him, and we were basically not just adversaries, we were enemies already. But I compounded it at that moment because the seats of my Grand Prix were quite low, and for an older person who had a weak back or weak knees or something like that, it was difficult to get in and out of. So he turned around, and he's got the door open, he's got his feet on the ground, but he can't quite get up, you know. And so what I did, I reached over, and I touched him right here in the back, and I pushed him. You never touch an Indian in that spot. It's one of the most sacred spots, even in your body. It's the most sacred spot you have. For a stranger to touch you here, to scratch it or something like that, it's offensive. Don't let them do it. And particularly, don't do it to an Indian. And I did. I reached down, I touched his most sacred spot, and I pushed him simultaneously to his feet. When he turned around and looked at me, I knew that I was in deep trouble. And I knew it was only a matter of time before he and I, like the Titans, would clash, you know. So I knew at that point, too, that I could not go any further with him. Elliot was scared to death of him, and everybody else in the village, and he and I were now enemies. And, of course, I was anguished because I knew I had something important to do. Nonetheless, I had blown it, you know, through my conduct with him. So I went about my business, and I kept praying. I said, where do I go from here? I'm talking to Spirit, you know, Great Spirit. Where do I go from here? What do you want me to do? One night, I'm sitting in my apartment 150 miles away, and there was a picture which had been given to me by a reverend in Phoenix, and I forget her name right now. Nonetheless, there was a painting, an oil painting of a Yaqui Indian sorcerer. And I had ambivalent feelings about that dude, you know, because when I looked at him in certain ways, he was extremely evil. Other times, he was not. So I didn't quite know what to make of the picture. But all of a sudden, I was sitting under the picture. The picture is behind me. Now, what I'm about to tell you is bizarre, but believe me, it is true. As I was sitting under the picture, all of a sudden, I felt something inside of me. And it was as though they had placed a balloon inside of me and began to pump it up. Like somebody, maybe a football bladder, you know, put in your stomach, and then they attach it to a pump, and they begin to pump it up. And what happened was I got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it increases when finally it was cutting off my pulmonary system, my breathing, my heart was doing this and what have you, and I knew that I was being attacked and I was being killed. And I couldn't for the life of me understand where it was coming from, although I knew it was associated with that picture. What happened was, right on the verge of collapsing and dying, I went and I said, "Dear God, help me." The minute I did that, the minute I asked for help, right away, clairvoyantly, I saw who was doing it. 150 miles away, and it was Juan Francisco. He was taking me out using this picture. Right away, he and I went into this titanic battle, the good versus the bad. And we battled back and forth and back and forth. And I couldn't gain anything with him, and he couldn't gain anything with me. And I was just wondering how long it's going to last, and who's going to outlast who, and if I will win. Now, at that point, I never stopped for one moment, sending him love and light and balance. At the same time, asking for all the power from God as I was doing it. Finally, I saw him weaken. And almost in a very short order, he finally just fell apart and he fell to the ground. He was totally exhausted. At the same moment, 150 miles away, sitting in this chair, I fell off my chair onto the floor, and I was wringing wet, totally enervated, so weak I couldn't even stand up. But I was happy, I was exalted in fact, because I had bested him, and my attitude was that now that I had bested him, I could go back to him and work with him. We could possibly find some commonality to do God's work. I crawled over to the couch, and I crawled up on it, and I thanked God for sparing my life, and as I said, I was exalted. And I said, now I will go back and do it the right way. I will work with them. But that was not to be. At that point, they gave me a message. Of course, what happened was I saw an immediate vision, and there was a picture of a crossroads, north, south, east, west. Here in this corner was a campfire, and sitting around it were 6 Indians. And they were sitting around the campfire, and they were deliberating something about something. I wasn't sure what it was at the time. Later on, what it was, they were deliberating whether or not to allow me to continue with my Indian work. And so at that point, I did not have the full realization of what they were doing. This was very clear. I was at a crossroads because of what happened with Juan Francisco. This told me from this message that I would have to wait. I waited for almost a year before they came back to me and said, we think you've learned your lesson. Now we will give you another assignment. And I'll go into that later. But at this point, they told me, number one, I can never go back to the Papagos, that I have blown it. I have not listened. I had not found the old friendly shaman that I was supposed to do. I had paid the price. I had been tested, and I had passed the test. But nonetheless, from here on, without question, I had to listen to everything they told me to do. And ever since that time, I have. I learned the hard way, and I was very lucky to get out with my life, really. So the next assignment then took me up to the Pueblo Indians, where I ultimately found my teacher, and a great Indian by the name of Sunhawk, and of course that put me on the path, and I've been there now for 23 years, working with the Indians of the United States, also all the southwest United States, mostly all the tribes, into Mexico and Central America. I spent 23 years walking amongst them and learning their truths. So that's, in a capsulized form, how I became involved with the Indians. It was not an easy thing. And per usual, I was resistant, and I paid the price for it before I finally, acceded to be an instrument of the brothers and to do God's work amongst them. Okay, now to bring it back on target. I just did that to lend some authenticity to my awareness of the Indians and who they are and who I am in relation to them. I could tell you many, many experiences, and along the way I'll probably interject a couple more, which are very profound, and again were of a nature that had I not made the right decision, I would have long been dead. Now let's talk about the Indians. I've said to you, number one, that they are the eldest of brothers, and I think we should begin there, and then we'll move into their being the keepers of the arcane secrets, as all Indian and Aboriginal peoples are. Yesterday, I said to those of you who were here, I said, we are the savages, they are not. They're much more advanced than we are. They're in touch with nature. There isn't anything that an Indian does that is by mistake. Now, I'm talking about true Indians. I'm not talking about the make-believe Indians. And would you believe that in the large proportion of them are people who are Indians in the making? They are not real Indians. Here sits the real Indians. You and I, in white flesh. We've been Indians before. We've been successful Indians. Many of us have recall of having been Indian. Just as I told you, I can remember Lemurian times, Atlantean times, and of course times in the not too distant future, past, I should say. And so I know that I've had more than one lifetime as an Indian. If you were to investigate your own lifetimes, past lifetimes, you would find too that you have been Indians and you have passed the test. Now the ones who have abused the Indians so badly in the past, whether it be the conquistadors, the cavalrymen, the merchants and traders and so forth, they're the ones now who've come back for the last time in a red body to overcome the karma which they have created in order to graduate or be a part of the graduation ceremony coming up. So again, I say that many of you are more Indian than those on the reservation. But you must also remember this, that within the deep circles of all Indian and Aboriginal peoples, there is a very pure strain that is existent and will exist, of course, as long as they have a place here on earth. So there is a faction amongst them that is truly unadulterated and is truly Indian. The majority of what you see, though, on reservations and what have you, are not true Indians. Again, I emphasize that they are Indians in the making. I know no few Indians who are traveling around the world, and particularly in Europe right now, who claim to be representatives of their tribes and are nothing more than rip-off artists. They're con men. And it's sad to see. Some of them have reached great stature. For instance, and I say this with no reservation really, Many people talk about Grandfather David Menangai. And David Menangai was a beautiful old man. He purportedly was 110 years old, but I think he was somewhere around 86 when he died, but purportedly he was 110. David, in my opinion, and get this in your minds too, I say what I know and what I think to my Indian friends. If I see something's wrong, I will say it. I expect them to say the same thing to me. We have a very open, honest relationship. And David, although he's deceased right now, David was a dirty old man, number one. This guy could find more excuses to paw a white woman than any other Indian I think I've ever seen. All Indian men want to put another feather in their bonnet by having a white woman, and that's just characteristic of most of them, you know. David was he really excelled at that. I remember one occasion I went to an enclave in Mesa, and I was the only white man there. There was another one who was Mexican white, who was the interpreter to Luis from the Huichol Indians, and so two of us have white skin. The rest were all Indians. And during the conclave, we had a break, and it was in one of the university buildings down there. I can't exactly remember. It was on the campus someplace. And in the foyer, the lobby, was a circular fountain. And it was dry at that time, so it was nice to sit on that, you know. You'd sit in a circle and you could talk and so forth. And so David was very interested in the lady I had with me, Elizabeth Huerta. And of course, she speaks about 7 different languages. But she sat down to talk to Grandfather David, and I had other things to do, and so I left and came back in about 10 minutes. I think I went to the bathroom or something. Anyhow, came back, and Elizabeth says to me, can I talk to you in private? And I said, well, sure, what? She said, I have something to ask you. So we walked over to the windows away from David and the rest of the people here, the other Indians, and she said, does this mean in Indian the same thing it means in English? And she was scratching her palm like this. And I said, yes, who did it? She said, he did, David. And she said, not only that, he touched my breast, you know. He pretends to be blind and he's doing this, and of course he knew what he was doing all the time, you know. And I laughed. I said, damn it, he's never changed, you know. He's a dirty old man. So anyhow, David finally died. When I was talking to another Indian friend of mine not too long ago, just about a week ago, and when he died, would you believe they found $45,000 in a glass jar in his hut? You should have seen the hut. It was the most rundown thing you've ever seen in your life. And of course, everybody knew he had that money, you know, that he was taking money supposedly for the tribe, but he was hoarding it for himself, and he didn't take it with him. And there was a big fight over who's going to get that money. So we'll be talking about that type of Indian later on, you see. Another great elder just died recently with the Hopis, Grandfather Jack. And but another interesting thing about the Hopis, these men are not the power. The Aboriginal peoples and the Indian peoples are a matriarchal society. It's not patriarchal as you may think. In the old days, an Indian never went to war without the approval of the woman. They had a woman's council and they had a men's council. The two had to agree. They both met separately, and they would come to a final and logical conclusion, and then they would vote. The men would vote first. The women, of course, would consider it, and then she did one of two things. If the women's council approved with what the men were about to do, she would place a white feather on the pile. Now, the Indians voted with feathers. If it was not with their approval, what she would do, she would place a black feather on it, which was absolute. No man, no chief, or no Indian would violate that, because it is a supreme power, a matriarchal society. It still is today. Some of them have forgotten it, but if you'll look deep within every Indian tribe, you will find that it's ruled basically very quietly and very softly by a woman. And of course, that bespeaks of a lot of things that are happening on the planet right now that must come into reality for us also. The fact that the world must return to a matriarchal position. I talked about that briefly yesterday, and The insanity of man, I was saying, cannot exist or coexist with the world we know much longer. And if it does, then we're all in deep trouble. The power has to be passed back to the women because they are the ultimate. So I won't stay on that too much longer. Let's now go into why the Indians are the eldest of brothers. It's the most interesting thing. To do this, I have to relate to you who the Indians really are. Would you believe that they are Lucifer's children? Lucifer. Now, most people, they cringe when I say this and say, Lucifer's children? But he's bad. Lucifer's not bad at all. He's still one of the chosen archangels of the Creator. He did goof, that's for darn sure, and he's paying a price for it, but he's still one of the chosen major archangels in the whole ensemble of the one we know as the Creator. That's for darn sure, and he's paying a price for it, but he's still one of the chosen major archangels in the whole ensemble of the one we know as the Creator. He's up there on rank and file with the 24 elders who sit on the right hand of God. At one time, he was God's, Creator, Great Spirit as the Indians call him, he was Great Spirit's favorite archangel and son. Because he was so favored, and he had done such great work, and incidentally, how many of you know that Lucifer means light? Did you know that? Yes. He's an angel, an archangel of light. But he's playing a destined role here on earth, you see, to cause us to grow. He's not bad. He's helpful. Now, Lucifer did do this. When he was given his own planet, and that planet, incidentally, was called Maldek. It's a Maldekian energy. And I'll spell it for you, for those of you taking notes. M-A-L-D-E-K. M-A-L-D-E-K. Maldek. Don't confuse that with the planet called Marduk. To go back to the great planet of Maldek, which was Lucifer's planet, let's discuss that for a moment and see what actually happened, which caused the Indians to be here on earth. Now remember that I said that they are the eldest of brothers. It all began up here with the ancient planet called Maldek. That was a planet given to Lucifer by God meritoriously for the great work that he had done, in the eons past. Now, something happened to Lucifer when he received his own planet, and he was totally out of character. By totally out of character, I mean where he was loving and giving and beneficent and what have you in the past. All of a sudden, the opposite side of him came out in full. He became despotic. He became cruel. He became negative. Everything about him became basically despicable vis-a-vis of what he had once been before. Now, it's somewhat of an enigma, but I suppose it was by design. Somehow or other there was a divine game plan behind it, but nonetheless, that did happen to him. He reached a state of degradation, much like the one that we're facing here today on his planet Maldek. And what he did in the end, with all the malefic and negative energy which he was creating there, he blew up the ancient planet of Maldek with a nuclear explosion. The bits and fragments and pieces, of course, are what we know. Number one today as the asteroid belt, and number two, the core of the ancient planet of Maldek is what we know today as our moon. You'll hear that information on the tape back there, what NASA didn't tell us about the moon. Now, the Indians, of course, told me this long before I learned it from other sources. Before I got it from the Space Brothers, the Indians had already told me that the moon was the remnants, if you will, of that ancient planet called Maldek. Now, when he destroyed his own planet, Maldek, of course, retribution had to take place, and he and his peoples were banished to the lower heavens. So, from the high elevated position they once had on the right hand of God, so to speak, he and his people were banished to Mars in the lower heavens. Now, believe it or not, his people were the red people, the ones today we call the Indians. They are Lucifer's children. Those children were then given to the ward of Mars, and that was a big mistake. Mars became the mentor and the keeper of Lucifer's children. Now we know that Mars is a male energy. We also know that Mars is militant in nature. We know that Mars does not want to wipe noses and change and clean fannies and things like this. So he's not in the baby-keeping mode, attitude, or business, and he resented the fact that he had to take care of these truculent Luciferian children. So what happened is that they, the ones we know as the Indians today, the Luciferian children, suffered greatly at the hands of Mars because he neglected them, much as, as mothers and parents are doing today with children here upon this planet. Now, simultaneously with that, there was another planet that was in a state of beingness, although still in the etheric, so was Mars. And Earth at that time also, the sister planet, this is male, this is female. This sister planet is the brother or sister of Mars, and she looked at what was happening to those children, and she anguished. She says, "Oh my God, look what he's doing." So finally, she could stand it no longer, and she petitioned the hierarchy to give those children to her. She said, "Give them to me, I'll take care of them." And of course, the council and the hierarchy took a look at that and looked at Mars and saw what he was doing with those children and said, "Well, maybe she got a point." Then they said to her, "I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll give them to you on a trial basis to see how well you fare." And they fare. So they did. They awarded her the Indian children, and they were sent to Earth. And bear in mind that this was done before the Earth had reached a state of solidity. In other words, it was not yet in solid form. It was still very much in the etheric. Nonetheless, there was a bonding that took place at that point in time between the Indian people and planet Earth. They have never forgotten it. And they have never forgotten some of the things I'm about to tell you either. This is why, reverently, the Indian refers to Earth as Mother. They remember this, from eons back when they were awarded to her, when they once had been the children of Mars and had suffered greatly. From the time that they were given to Mother Earth, they fared so much better. And here comes why they are the eldest of brothers. They were the first race to be introduced upon this planet, and they were introduced, as I already said, before the planet became into a state of solidity. Now, as the planet itself, our sacred planet Earth, began to reach a state of solidity, the consciousness of the Earth and the consciousness of the Indians became one. It's the only race in the whole world here upon this planet that has that commonality or that claim, you see. They, and I suppose the Aboriginal peoples, I'm not sure about them, but there is a kindredness in there, I'd have to say. But definitely the Indians bonded with Mother Earth during that etheric transformation into a state of solidity. So this is why, and explains why, they have such a great love for Mother, and they say very reverently, I don't care who they are, even the make-believe Indians, Mother Earth. They honor her. They look upon her as a living organism, and indeed she is, and they revere the sacredness of nature. It's the only race that truly worships, you might say, planet Earth, and of course the Earth here. Okay, so by virtue of the fact that they were introduced on Earth first, they became the eldest of brothers. They have memories that predate the solidity of Earth, and therefore they are the wisest of all the races here at this time, which goes along with what I'm about to tell you, and I've already told you that they are the keepers of the arcane seekers. Let's take a look at the introduction of races upon the Earth. The first one, of course, was the Indian, or I'll say the red man, that's more like it, and then the black man, and then the yellow man, then the brown man, and then the white. The white is the Johnny-come-lately. Red first, black is the second oldest race, yellow is the third oldest race, and then of course the brown, which would be, of course, the mixed Texas, Indian and Spanish and what have you, but there is a brown flavor to our cultures, and they are down here. And the white, of course, as I said, is the last of the brothers to come to Earth. But there are also the whites, as you will learn, of course, are the, you might say they're the footstool of God. We are to do the finalization work, which is, of course, to be evident upon earth in the very near future, and right now, for that matter. In this process, though, that is about to happen, the ones who will play the key role in this will be the red man, because he is the eldest of brothers, he is the spiritual leader of the future, and he is the keeper of the arcane secrets. So that's how he became the eldest of brothers. Now, let's discuss then some of the spiritual aspects of the Indian and see how that comes about. Now, before I get into that, though, I think it's appropriate to discuss something that's little known. You will not find it in writing, and you will find it, of course, in the memorabilia of the Indians, and they talk about this. Incidentally, Indians, at least those of ancient days, did not write. Everything was passed on by mouth, you know. And in many primitive tribes, this still is the case. We have people here in the United States, for instance, the Eskimos and what have you. All traditions are passed on by mouth and memory, because the minute it's written in their opinion, it gets basically lost, or you begin to lose it, you see, once you commit it to paper. Book or not, it makes no difference. But if it's passed on by memory and by memory rote and what have you, it is everlasting because it has energy. When you put it on paper, it loses its energy, so therefore it's not lasting, you say. Incidentally, too, while we're talking about Indians, and before I get into the story I'm about to tell you, which has to do with the spirituality and the, shall we say, the responsibilities of the Indians, not coming out very well. Okay. I think perhaps at this point, to bring this into proper focus, let's go back to one known as Jesus, because I had to talk about him later on anyway. He is known to the Indians as the Indian Messiah. We call him, of course, the Indian, not the Indian, but the Christ, you know. But they always refer to him as the Indian Messiah. Now, the Indian Messiah happened at a time probably when most of us were never aware of that sacred event. It actually happened during the time that Jesus was crucified. When Jesus was crucified, there was a shift in energy, there was a shift in responsibilities, and there had to be some atomic changes made in the divine scenario and plan here on earth. Now, Jesus, if you read my book back there, The 12 Women Apostles, I tell you in there, in a very certain way, but a soft way, that Jesus was none other than God personified, who came down to earth to experience that which he had created. And of course, we mistook him for something else, and we know the history speaks for itself. We finally hung him on a cross, and that was the end of that. Now, by virtue of the fact that we could not recognize him for who he truly was, there had to be an alternative plan. So what was decided was that when Jesus was finally crucified, they had to do something else with that sacred energy and that Adamic or atomic energy. And you got a problem there? Okay. So what did they do? They took the atomic seed, or the Adamic seed, whichever way you look at it, because it means the same. Atom means atom, A-T-O-M. A-T-O-M and A-D-A-M, of course, it's the same synergy, so to speak, but spoken of course, in a different way. But that Adamic or atomic seed was then taken away at that time from the Judean culture, and believe it or not, was transplanted amongst the Native American people and the Aboriginal people of the world. So there was a major shift in consciousness and transformational processes here on the earth. Now, I have visited hundreds and hundreds of tribes throughout the southwest United States and New Mexico and, of course, Central America. The most primitive of tribes that I've gone into, I mean, these are very primitive people that I have stayed with, all have total recall of the one we call the Indian Messiah. The Indian Messiah is someone who walked amongst them over 2,000 years ago. When you relate this to a time frame or a date, you will find out it took place within hours or days right after his resurrection. and he appeared to them all over the world. Now, the most astounding part about it is that he appeared to them simultaneously. Now, the first recorded history of him appearing before a Native American or Aboriginal type of peoples, believe it or not, happened in New Zealand. And we have a lady here today from New Zealand, and she's very familiar with the Moray people. Why he chose the Moray people, I don't know, but he did. Now, for those of you who are interested in this, I suggest that you get a book. If you have a pencil, write it down, because it's one of the most beautiful, wonderful books you'll ever read. And it was written by Taylor Hanson, and the title of it is He Walked the Americas. If you can find the book, you won't find it on the shelf, but I think you can still order it. It is a mind-blowing revelation as to who he really was, the great Messiah, and what he actually did in those days, you see. His first appearance was, as I already noted, in New Zealand and amongst the Morays. Now, the Morays are a very difficult people. They're truculent, and back in those days, they were a very warlike tribe, and still are to a large extent, isn't that right? They still fight with one another. And back in those days, if they didn't have an adversary, in other words, an admirable adversary, what they would do, they would choose up sides and they would fight one another to the death. This is how much they loved war. So this one day, that's exactly what happened. Brother was fighting brother. And into this cove, they saw three big birds coming. And they stopped momentarily to watch these three big birds as they were sailing over across the water into their cove and bay. And now, what they were sailing ships, you know, with sails and so forth. And they momentarily stopped and watched them, and they anchored, and that was about the size of it. They were too busy, of course, taking care of themselves in an adversarial way. So what they did, they resumed fighting again, but they kept a wary eye upon those birds in the bay. Now, finally, they saw activity on one ship. And it was most unusual because there was a personage on this one ship who was not normal because he could rise above the ground, the deck of the ship, and ultimately what he did, he rose above the deck of the ship and he walked down a transparent ladder, so to speak, or a pair of steps to the water itself. He walked through the air. Now they witnessed this, and this, of course, is duly documented. And when he got down to the water, he walked on top of the water, you know. And, of course, the fighting stopped immediately, and they all turned around to watch this apparition happening. And then they saw that he was going to walk to shore, and they all ran down to deal with him, whether it was to kill him or greet him or what have you. They finally greeted him in love. Because when he finally lighted upon shore with his golden sandals and his beautiful white robe flecked with gold and so forth, he was a majestic period. He was white and, of course, blonde hair and I don't remember his brown or blue eyes, but nonetheless, he was Caucasian. And as he beached, the first thing they noticed that he had no water on him whatsoever. His sandals were not wet, his garment was not wet. And at that point, they recognized him as being a god, and they fell to the earth, and they began to revere him and to worship him. He told them to rise and said, I'm not here to be worshipped, I'm here to teach you. What you're doing is so wrong. You're fighting amongst yourselves. You are destroying yourself. I'm here to teach you better things. He spent 6 months with them, and he taught them such things as government. He taught them hygiene. He taught them hygiene and sanitation. All the things which were necessary, of course, to govern themselves and to be successful, he taught them over a period of 6 months. They fell in love with him. They dearly loved him. But finally he said to them, my time has come, I must leave. And they, of course, were very, very distressed that he, their master now, because what he did, he appointed amongst them a council of 12 with a 13th member, just like he did previously with his disciples. And, of course, each one in that council of 12 had a delicate responsibility, and the chief, of course, was the one who was the 13th member and was to rule them. So this did happen. And when he felt that they were at a point of maturation where they no longer needed him, that's when, of course, he bid them adieu. They were very, very sorry that he had left. Now, from that point, history tells us, and this is not the history that you would normally study, but the other history, He sailed from there to a place called South America. We know as South America today, and also specifically to Peru. Now, it's interesting to note that each and every place he went, he had a different name. Every tribe gave him a different name, and the name that he assumed, of course, in Peru was a name called Amaru. Now, there's an interesting aspect to this, Amaru. And I suspect, as do others, that this is where the name America came from. A-M-A-R-U. We had a president who used to say America. Remember who it was? Johnson. You know, with that Texas twang he had and so forth, he was always saying Amar, like this. And instead of America, he was saying America. Well, Amaru, of course, was none other than the Indian Messiah, the same Indian Messiah who visited the Maori people in New Zealand and turned them into something peaceful and something constructive, although they didn't keep it entirely, nor did many other tribes that he later visited. But that was the purpose and intent. Now, when he got to Peru, he did the same type of work in Peru, and then he began to travel to other countries and finally ended up in our own United States. Now, any place that he went and established the headquarters and did the work, the Peruvians always said, that now becomes Amaru. In other words, it was laying claim to real estate that he had taught in and resided in. It automatically became Amaru. And I'm not so sure that the name America did not come from him, Amaru, as opposed to Americus Vespucius or Columbus or any other reasons that may be given. I do believe that it probably came from here. Now, in addition to the name of Amaru, he was best known as he walked through the Americas, particularly, let's say, Central America, South America, on up into Mexico, Yucatan first, and then Mexico, up to the United States border. He was basically known then, was several different names, but Quetzalcoatl was the most common name, Quetzalcoatl. And of course, it means plumed serpent. Plumed serpent, of course, indicates something very, very sacred. Even today, the bird Quetzal, there is a Quetzal bird you'll find throughout the Mayan jungle and in the southern part of Mexico, on down into Central America. And the feathers of that bird, even today, are considered to be very, very sacred. And of course, the Quetzal and Quatl indicates water and a plume from the Quetzal bird. So that all signifies grace. It signifies someone who is religiously strong. All right, now as he went into other parts of the world, particularly up here in our own United States when he got up here, he was known by other names, some of which, for instance, if we go up here to the Hopis knew him then and even do today in their secret doctrine as Tocopah, T-O-C-O-P-A-H, Tocopah. He was also known as Jesus. Isn't that interesting? And of course, this is the Latin or Spanish for Jesus. We have a tribe right here in the southwest United States that refers to him when they talk about him as Jesus. He was known also, trying to think of some of the other names, Isikoto. Judy, we were talking about the Papagos Indians. They know him in their ancient doctrine and so forth as Isikoto. And we found that, Judy and I found out that we have something very much in common with the Papagos Indians. She's currently working with them. She has Project Prevention too, in Phoenix, and she's well known to the Indian tribes such as the Navajos, the Zunis, and I think the Hopis, and she's also working with the Papagos tribe, the one that I first started with, and working with the Pima too, aren't you? Yeah. Salt River, Pima, yeah. So it's great. So we find out during the break that we had a lot of things in common in terms of the Papagos people. Incidentally, too, one of the places that he visited, and it's also curious that the Papagos, if I remember right, also called him Isikoto. But they tried to kill him, just like they tried to kill me. They tried to kill Jesus too, the one known as the Indian Messiah. But he turned the tables on them, and when they plotted to lead him into a cave and entomb him, he suckered them in there, and then he entombed them. And he left them in there for a long time until they were repentant, and then, of course, allowed them to escape. But he told them at that time that he would never go back again, that they weren't worth it. It was interesting that I should choose as the first tribe the Papagos. Incidentally, too, the Papagos are a very formidable tribe. The only tribe, believe it or not, that the Apaches fear and have never conquered are the Papagos. They have tried again and again. They come down out of the White Mountains, and they've attacked the Papagos only to lose. And what the Papagos used to do is they used to dig spider holes, and then they would put level ground over it, and as the Apaches would come in, you see, to look for them, they'd let the Apaches go by, and then they would raise up out of their spider holes and shoot them in the back, and they would decimate them, And the Apaches, I don't know how many times, tried to take them and couldn't do it, and finally wrote it off as bad news. So Isikoto, C-O-A-T-L. We also know him as Digonawida. I'll be talking about that in a little while. Digon, that's G-O-N, Wida. That's phonetically, that's the way it's spelled, Digonawida. He was, of course, the chief of the Iroquois. And I'll talk about him in a minute because it's very important, because it's strongly suspect, in fact, I know it's not suspect, it's fact, that our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence and everything was based upon the doctrine of Digonawida. So each tribe, of course, has a different name for him. As he came amongst them to teach them the principles of love and light and balance, along with government and all the things that they needed to be self-reliant, they gave him a different name. So every tribe, of course, has a different name for him, wherever you may happen to go. Now, the one thing that's most interesting about this is that when you begin to study this phenomena, you will find out that while he was visiting New Zealand, simultaneously he was visiting other tribes all over the world. How did he do it? Obviously, it was a spiritual energy. Obviously, it was Creator who was dividing itself into these different segments to visit all the other tribes simultaneously. The greatest disparity in that visitation, believe it or not, was about 3 days. And all of them are basically within 24 hours of each other. When you document his visit amongst them, it's always within a 24-hour period with one or two exceptions. So, it had to be something greater than materialism or anything that we know as being the truth. So it's it's a very interesting story. Now, let's talk about Digonawida for a minute. And of course, he comes considerably after the one we know as Amaru or Tokopa. When he had visited these other tribes, Digonawida surfaces later on, and he is an Iroquois chieftain who was born of noble birth and also was of the energy of Quetzalcoatl, Amaru, Isikoto, and all the other names which he goes by. Digonawida was responsible for bringing to a state of peace 5 nations who were warring against one another, and one of them being the Iroquois. Now, when the war was going on, Digonawida basically was a small boy. But from the time he was born to the time he grew up to become a great chief and leader of the Iroquois people, he was always marked because of his great spirituality, his clairvoyance, and all the things which, of course, are characteristic of a teacher, spiritual teacher. He brought 5 tribes, later 7 tribes, under one flag. And what he did, he said, go out and cut a pine tree, and from this they shaved it, and from this pine tree, this pole, we shall hang our pennants. In other words, it ended up, as I said, with 7 of them. It started out with 5. He organized and put 5 tribes in order to stop war and fratricide and all the things were going. He put them under one flag on this one pole. And of course, he was the ruling member of all of that. Now, he kept that for years. He also wrote up a declaration. He also wrote up a constitution. And would you believe that later on, when we were forming our own governor, our forefathers borrowed from him the tenets of the agreements he had made at that time. They borrowed from him to construct, if you will, our own Constitution and our own Declaration of Independence. We borrowed from them. Here again, those dumb savages, have a powerful influence upon our life even today. Did you ever stop and think that, let's take, for instance, the attitudes that we have towards the black and the attitudes we have towards the Indians. Indians, God bless you, whoever that was, the Indians, of course, are always in a favorable repose, if you will, with the white man. And we could say that's due to his guilt and what he's done to them and so forth. But it's far greater than that, because we have an awareness that they are a great peoples and they are a great consciousness. Go right down here to Sedona. Go to the art galleries, and what do you see but picture after picture of Indians? Go down to Tlaquepaque, and what do you see? Indian jewelry up the gumsum. Intuitively and what have you, we have this deep abiding feeling and love for the Indian peoples. And we don't know why. I'm giving you some of the reasons why we feel that way. And we feel it intuitively and subliminally, but on a common level, materialistic level, we don't know why. On the other hand, we have antagonism many times towards the black man. And the question is there, sir, again, why? Why do we feel as we do sometimes towards the white man when we're all God's children? I mean, the only difference between us is the color of our skin. The soul that is within, that spark of divinity which is within, is all one. And yet, of course, under the guise of all the things which we perpetrate towards one another, we come into racism and bias and judgments and all the things that we have. Now, as I told you yesterday, that's soon to change. I also told you yesterday, for those who weren't here, watch the Middle East. Watch it very closely, because that's where the planet, its consciousness, and our evolutionary growth will end. We have yet monumental problems with the Middle East. Even the government, on one hand or another, knows about this. Yesterday, I related to the group that there are two major rays upon the planet, and these two major rays, one are female and two male. I told the people yesterday that when the communists invaded Tibet, the Dalai Lama, of course, made a mass exodus. He took with him, when he left there, purposely, knowingly what he was doing, he took with him the female ray of the planet. The Dalai Lama and his people have been the guardians and the keepers of the female ray for millenniums and centuries. So when he exited the country of Tibet, his home country, he took the female ray, he went into South America, he went into Peru, and he anchored the female ray at Lake Titicaca. Now, there is a complementary ray that must be married up with that female ray, and it's male or masculine in nature. And where do we find that? But right smack dab in the middle of the Middle East. And it is in a very, very violent, ill-tempered, and maladjusted form right now. As we know that the Middle Eastern men treat their women horribly, women are chattel. Women are secondary. Women are to be used for propagation and things of this nature, but there's not much respect, and there is no balance for the most part between the man and the woman. The old machismo is still being played out in the Middle East. In the rest of the world, we're beginning to make inroads and giving the women their due, giving them the credit they so justly deserve and so forth, but not in the Middle East. Now, there's a very archaic energy over there, which has to change, of course, as I said, before we graduate. And that energy has to be transformed into a more or less feminine, soft male energy before it can be married up to its complement like Titicaca. It isn't until we run through the full gamut of what's happening in the Middle East that this planet and its consciousness and you and I are ready for graduation from the third into the fourth and fifth dimension. Now, in the next 7 years, you're going to see horrendous things happen in the Middle East. And there'll be things that happen there that one minute we would consider to be insane, and then, but out of that, each one of these, something good will come, and there will be a greater transformation of softer male energy, which is preparatory to being married up with its twin flame in Lake Titicaca. So I just throw that out for what it's worth. Watch it. Watch it if you want to from a military point of view, or watch it from just a personal point of view, and you will see some great things about to happen over there. They play a major and key role. Okay, going back to the Ganawida, putting the 5 nations under one flag, we took this from the Ganawida, and today we have a flag pole from which we fly our banners. If you get down to the Capitol down here, you got the flag of Arizona, you got the American flag flying from it, and maybe something else. We took it from the Indians. Again, if you go into your Constitution, you go into your Declaration of Independence, our forefathers borrowed from the wisdom of the Indians. They spoke about it then, but of course in history it finally became lost. Jefferson was given credit for writing it, you know, but the Indians were never given credit as being the source of all the wisdom that was both in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence. So the Indians, you can see, still have a profound impact upon us, either directly or indirectly. A good example, of course, is what we see right here in Sedona, as I said a little while ago, through their jewelry and the pictures in the art galleries and so forth. We carry a deep-seated love for them and respect and realization that indeed they are the spiritual leaders of the future, and yes, they are the eldest of brothers. In terms of the black race, and this is not said in a prejudicial way, I don't mean it that way, but the red race and then the black race. There was a time, momentarily, when the black race was the supremacist of all races. But because they abused the power, which they did, resorting to black magic and many other things, voodoo and all the things that they're into, they were then relegated to a lesser rank, and they fell, of course, beneath the red man himself. And of course, that still makes the red man the senior and the eldest of brothers. The second eldest, as I said, though, was and is the black race. You find a lot of good among the blacks. It's like the Indians. You get to the hardcore of the black race, you will find very fine, refined, I should say, and purposeful people. Again, their strongest asset, even in the black race, you know, is amongst their women, not the men. They're the ones who hold the fabric together in the black race. Okay, any questions, anything I've covered so far? Yes, who has a question here? Yes, Doris. Mm-hmm.
Also, part of the state of civilization. Originally, were they people?
You mean the people in the Middle East? Well, there's some conjecture. There's some conjecture about that, and how valid it is, I don't know. The Judean culture, the Jews themselves, look upon the Indians as being the lost tribe, you know. And they also sometimes say they are the 12th tribe. Now, I think they have it backwards. I think the Indians, of course, are the superior. In fact, I know they are. They're the eldest of brothers. And if there's a lost tribe, it's the Judean culture, not the Indians. And I think somehow or other it's become misinterpreted and warped. The Indians definitely, you know, in every culture you have basically what you could say a Jewish-oriented segment. If you were to look at the Indians, the Cherokees are the Jews of the Indians. They're great traders. They're very bright when it comes to commerce, and they know how to beat the white man at his own game and so forth. Very clever people. Okay. Now, let's go back a little bit further in history again. Any more questions? Anybody have? Yes, dear. Carol? The what, dear? I don't know. I didn't see that. Did not see that name on my list. The research I've done, I don't have it. He could be. I'm not saying he's not.
What I said from that really seems to come to my mind is what you're saying.
Yeah. If you were here yesterday, of course, I didn't get into depth, and I didn't have time to do it, but I was making reference to the Wormwood peoples. And the Wormwood people are our mentors, and I guess you could call them progenitors. They put us here. They put us here to use us, of course. And in the Bible, it makes some reference to that because it states in the Bible, let us make man in our own image. Now, God didn't say that, but the lesser gods did, and that was the Wormwood people, you know. And the white people, of course, have been very much under the aegis and control of the Wormwood people. Not so much the Indians and the Aboriginal peoples. They seem to be able to retain their identity and their integrity, whereas the white race, of course, is prone to give their power away.
So what you were kind of taking the Wormwood people and Lucifer, you say, with this heart?
Well, that's a separate energy. Lucifer is still one with God. Lucifer made a mistake, and he's paying the price. He plays the role, and again, the Indians relate to that so very much better than we do. When you talk to the Indians and they talk about what we call good and bad, they relate good and bad as the same energy, only divided by man's imagination and unpurposeful thinking, if you will, you see. There's a very beautiful story that the Indians tell about the two brothers to go along with that. For instance, they talk about the Lord of Light and the Lord of Darkness. And we find this particularly in the Mayan prophecy and the Mayan belief system. The story goes that the Lord of Light is the first one. Now, first of all, there's two brothers. They're twins. One is the Lord of Light and the other one is the Lord of Darkness. Now, they came to the planet simultaneously, and together. And so what happens is, it's like flipping a coin. The Lord of Light says, all right, I'll go first, and then you follow me. Is that okay? So they said yes. They made an agreement. So what happens is the Lord of Light, the brother of Light, goes in and he teaches us everything he knows. He does this, as you will learn later on when I discuss the Mayan calendar, he does this for 13 heavens, and 13 heavens each heaven consists of 52 years. And so we're looking at 600, almost 700 years, that he reigns as the Lord of Light and teaches us everything we need to know on this planet. And then he turns to us. Now remember what I'm saying. This is the Indians' interpretation of both dark and light. And then the Lord of Light turns to us and says, do you got it? Do you have it? Do you understand it? We said, yeah, we got it. He says, good. He said, I'm going to go home. Now he knows darn well right we don't have it. But our ego's in the way, and we say we do. And so he says, okay. He says, my work is finished then. And he goes out that door. Standing outside that door is his brother, the Lord of Darkness. And he stops momentarily, and he talks to him and says, look, those little churches in there say they understand it well. They got full understanding of it. Go test them and see how much they do know. So in comes the Lord of Darkness, and this is when we get in trouble. Because he begins to test us as to how well we have learned from the Lord of Light. And we know what we have experienced since then. We're in it up to here all the time because we didn't learn well. And of course the Indians laugh about it, because they say it's the same energy, it's the same brothers, and they both have the same objective in mind, and that is to teach us so that we are ready to go back to the Creator at a given time. Each plays a significant role, but in a different way to prepare us for the final ascension from here into what we would call eternity, or back to the source from which we came. The Indians have a much more profound acceptance and understanding of these things than we do. They're much more realistic about it. They're not caught up as we are, as has been foisted upon us and imposed upon us by the Wormwood people. They don't deal in polarities. This is good, this is bad, and what have you. They recognize it as the same energy. Do you have a question, Judy? So their simplified belief system is much more acceptable to me than those things I see amongst the white people or white brothers. Okay. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
I've got a question on the masculine energy located in the Middle East.
Okay.
Is that from Mohammedanism?
Yeah, it is. Again, you see, of course, I guess Islamic would be a better word for it because it contains many of the factions within the Middle East. But all that energy, the one characteristic which is significant is that it is a masculine energy. A better way to put it, it's an aberrant masculine energy. You know, there's some males who are very balanced and, of course, are both feminine and masculine at the same time. I know when my charts have been done, astrologically and so forth, I have, believe it or not, a great deal of femininity in my chart, and I have pretty much a balance between my masculinity and my femininity, which I think also gives me the ability to love women the way I do and not fear them like many men do. I love women because I recognize them as the ultimate power, and I recognize them for who and what they are and the role they would play in the future. That's why I wrote the book, The 12 Women Apostles. Any more questions on that? Incidentally, I might share with you, and it's a little apart from the Indian dissertation we're into today, but to bring that to the edification of those of you who are here. In the 1970s, I think it was 75 or 76, I was working with the Pueblo Indians, and I had many, many significant experiences with them. And I told you yesterday that they had taken me into the Bermuda Triangle. They had showed me what was underneath it. They had explained to me why the ships and the planes and the people, so I think there was something like 2,000 some odd incidents down there, people, ships, and planes disappearing. The disappearance of all those elements, whether it be ships or planes or people, happens when that crystal is turned on. When they're beaming energy into that mother crystal that's under the Bermuda Triangle, that's when anything that happens to be within the sphere, the power sphere of the crystal itself, they are transformed into the fourth dimension and they dematerialize. So they stray into the energy of the crystal inadvertently when the extraterrestrials, of course, are energizing it to do other things here on Earth. And I explained that all yesterday for those of you who weren't here. Nonetheless, that's the explanation for the disappearance of ships and planes and so forth. We talked about the 12 crystals and the 12 pyramids, and incidentally, I guess I made a mistake yesterday, which I should clear up. I didn't hear the question that Doris asked, and she asked me if the pyramids in Egypt and Mexico were part of the 12 pyramidal system, the crystal system that surrounds the planet. And I had drawn a diagram here, such as this. And I said on either side of the equator, we had 12 crystals and 12 pyramids, which are, of course, located around the equator itself. So there's 24 items positioned around the equator of the United States, which are divine instruments of implementation, which are used to, of course, cause us to respond in a given way. And the question asked by Doris was that are some of those pyramids in Egypt and Mexico associated with the ones I'm talking about here? The answer, the true answer to that is that number one, those in Mexico and what have you, the Mayan influence and so forth, are not associated with this. But the one, of course, in Egypt is, because it's the central and key pyramid of the 12 for the whole world. No. The major crystal, of course, is to be found under the Bermuda Triangle. That's the one that sank Atlantis. Is that cleared up for you? Doris, is that satisfactory? Okay. I'm sorry some of you weren't here yesterday because this was an interesting fact. Yes, Judy? Who's manipulating it? The extraterrestrials. The guardian forces, not the bad ones. Let's go into another aspect of Indianness, which I think might be of interest to you. We said that the Indian Messiah who walked the Americas, that's both South and Central and North America, to include Canada, he played his role, and he played it very well. Now, at that time, he appointed key personnel throughout the United States and the world in this Western Hemisphere to play integral parts and important roles in the future. Some of those people, of course, are the Aboriginal peoples also. Many interesting stories, of course, are to be told both about the Indians and the Aboriginals. Returning to the Aboriginals, I think one of the most spectacular, and it's a true story, that I could ever tell was about a little Aboriginal in Australia who saved John Glenn's life. Anybody know that story? Yeah, it's a fantastic story, and believe it or not, NASA gave him credit for that momentarily. You know, it fleetingly appeared in the magazine, it fleetingly appeared in the newspapers, but then of course it was buried very quickly. The story goes thus. John was coming back from his trip, space trip, and of course he had to come down into the fiery elements of Earth again. And they had already written him off in terms of the disintegration of his capsule. They knew that his angle, his speed, and everything else was not suitable for entering the Earth's atmosphere in a favorable way, and that he was going to incinerate. And so NASA had written him off. Now, there was several tracking stations around the world, but one of the most important ones was in Australia. And so out of the bush, summarily, came this little Aboriginal medicine man, and he built a fire. And he began to increase the intensity of the fire to the point that he could make sparks. And he took a stick and he began to beat that fire, and the sparks just flew, and then he made incantations and what have you. And what they didn't know, they thought he was crazy, but what they didn't know was at that time he was working with John Glenn in that capsule and is re-entering into the atmosphere of the world. And John later said, in testimony, that as he was entering, of course, the sparks were flying all around him, and he couldn't understand where they were coming from. He suspected that maybe he was disintegrating, but the heat of the capsule, which should have been there, did not take place. The sparks were flying, but the heat in the capsule itself remained normal, and he entered the Earth's atmosphere perfectly successful. That little medicine man is the one who took the heat in the fire which he had built. He stirred up the sparks and what have you to also absorb the sparks that were flying from John's capsule, so that he actually made a safe entry into the world once again. There's the power of the Aboriginal type Indian mind. Never underestimate their powers and their prowess. They are far superior to us. I'll give you another good example. That's an Aborigine. Let me talk about a Inuit Eskimo and give you an example here. Now, for the most part, throughout the world, all medicine people are male in nature. But if you go up into Alaska and in areas up there in northern Canada, you will find that the medicine people are women. Seems like the colder the climate, the more that they are women. The hotter the climate, the more they are men. And of course, here throughout the southwestern United States, most of them are men too. But if you go to the Tingolets, which is an Eskimo tribe, you find that, of course, the medicine person is a woman. Now, what she does, through a customary procedure, is to look for a child who she thinks is a suitable replacement for her at the time she dies. And that child has to be, of course, selected way ahead of time. And then she takes the child, when the child's about 9 or 10 years old, she takes it under her wing and she begins to train it as her replacement. But the point is that sometimes a woman child does not appear. So what does she do? She does not give up like we would. Say, well, I guess we have to write it off, we can't do anything about it. No. She then begins to watch the boys as they're born. And then in a boy, she will find the qualities and the things which she thinks are suitable for a medicine person. And then she takes that little boy, with the permission of the parents, long before it's reached the age of 10, 9 or 10, you know, and she begins to change the sex of the boy. And she changes that sex from a male to a female, including anatomical parts. So by the time that child reaches the age of 10 years of age, she is now a girl instead of a boy. Now she does that with her mind. Never underestimate the power of the mind of the Aboriginal or Indian peoples. Everything has purpose. Everything has grace. Everything has power. I told you about the story between Juan Francisco and myself and my near-death experience with him. He did that with his mind. You can go into a kiva. A kiva is representative of the womb of a woman, or sometimes referred to as the womb of the earth, you know. And this is where all the sacred ceremonies take place with the Hopis and the Navajos and the Zunis and other people up in that part of the country, and sometimes the Pueblos. Inside, miraculous things happen. For instance, they can make a miniature sun rise on the west side of that kiva, go up and reach zenith, which would be 12 o'clock noon, and then begin to ascend and wane and set in the east, right before your very eyes. Or through some incantations or what have you, they can cause the most horrible, frightening thunderstorm you've ever seen in your life. I mean, lightning striking all around, torrential rain and everything else, and it's real. But what's doing it? Their minds. The mind of the Indian, the Native American people, and the Aboriginal people throughout the world is far superior to ours. They recognize the thought. They recognize that the real power of us is not the sum and substance of what we accept as power, but it's in the mind, it's in spirit, and they work with both. They combine mind and spirit to perform miraculous things here upon earth. You don't see Indians, for instance, dying of cancer. No, they have herbal medicines which they can use, or they have medicine men and women who will heal them overnight, you know. We, of course, as a white race and, you know, Caucasian and what have you, we're dependent upon our doctors who do nothing but give us pills. And all they do is mask the disease or whatever it may happen to be. We have others, of course, who are healers other than the Indians. We have the Filipino healers. We have other healers in South America. All of them have a different technique, but it's basically the same thing. Using the will of God, using the power which is inherent in all of us, but they're aware of their power, and they use it, of course, to help and to heal others. It's a beautiful thing that we have amongst us. Now, at one time or another, each and every one of us had this great gift, but we've forgotten it and we've lost it. Some on the earth are still remembering the great gifts that they have, and they use it for the benefit of you and I. So we're really blessed to have those people amongst us. Okay. Now, where do I want to go from here? I think at this point I would like to talk about one of the very chosen of the one called the Indian Messiah. Now, I've established that the Indian Messiah is the one that we know or knew as the Christ, and we know him today as the Christ. Now, we always say that the second coming of Christ, we're waiting for the second coming. Well, let me tell you something. He's already come. He's already here. He's sitting with you right now. He's in each and every body that is here if you will allow it to be. He's not going to come down here in the physical again and let you hang him on a tree like you did before. He's going to come in spirit. And he also said, and of course it had many implications, he said, I shall come like a thief in the night. He is in your consciousness or he is not. This is the second coming of the Messiah in the Christ. If you are of a like note of the incoming Christ consciousness, most certainly you will see him, and that will be the second coming of the Christ. But if you are not, you will not see him again. And of course, as I pointed out yesterday, you will experience the adversities which are going to be foisted upon the earth in the very near future. Yesterday, for those of you who were not here, I said, the question was asked about earth changes, and I said they are a certainty, and they are. They're going to happen with or without you. And if you want to be a part of those changes, you're going to be. If you say, no, that's not for me, I will be one with the Christ consciousness coming in, you will be spared those adversities. The decision is yours. As the God that you are, you have to make that decision right now. Again, I said to the people yesterday that prophetically it was said by Jesus over 2,000 years ago, know ye not that ye are gods. Gene and I had breakfast together this morning. He asked me where in the Bible that was, and I don't know. And I said to Gene, what you're going to have to do is get a concordance and look in there. It's in there. And I think, Gene, you'll probably find it in the, I know in my Bible, in the back, there's commentaries by Jesus, and they're all in red. And if you'll go through that, I'm quite sure that you will find it there. Nonetheless, he did say that. Yes, Melody?
Psalms 83:6.
Is it Psalms? Okay. Did you hear that, Gene?
Psalms 8.
Yeah, and if you didn't get it right, see Melody later on. Psalms 82:6? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So I do get off path here once in a while, but I just try to bring into your consciousness, those who weren't here yesterday, some of the things I said yesterday. I said also yesterday that these are very exciting times and how blessed we are, each and every one of us, to be here. When I stop and think that in a couple of months I'm going to be 70 years old, that I have been spared so much, to be here, to do this type of work, there isn't a time that I'm not deeply touched. There isn't a time that I don't thank God that I'm here to experience all that we're experiencing right now. Many times I cry. And it's not a cry of sorrow, it's a cry of joy. That I could be chosen as one of those who is a messenger of our time, so to speak, to bring the word to people throughout the world. I want now to talk about a great man. His name is most unlikely. It's a most unlikely name. His name is Ichita Ichina. Anybody ever hear of him? Ichita Ichina. Great man. He is the chosen of the Messiah. He is a man who is cosmic in nature. He's Caucasian. Stands over 6 foot. He's stalwart. He's blonde and blue eyes, and he's a very gentle giant. And he's revered by all Indian and Aboriginal peoples all over the world. All of them know him. His first appearance amongst all Indian tribes and Aboriginal peoples dates back to 1890. And now, if you remember the date, 1890, this was shortly after the Indian Wars, you see, on the Western Front. At that time, the American government was very, very concerned that the Indians might re-rally and become a problem again. There was a deep concern for this. And they were so much concerned that they appointed a general to be in charge of Indian affairs and to put out intelligence nets to monitor the conduct of the Indians on a day-to-day basis. His name was General Miles. Now, this is all duly recorded in military history. He also had an aide, and his name was Lieutenant Robinson. There's also, you'll find in 3 of the major presses, Chicago and Salt Lake City and Boston. The newspapers of those days, they had different names than they have right now, also have a record of the events which I'm about to relate to you pertaining to this great person called Ichita Ichina. Now, as already indicated, Ichita Ichina is a cosmic being. I think, I'm not so sure about this, but I have a pretty good insight on it. He lives to be 300 or 400 years old, and then he passes on. Another Ichita Ichina, a replica, if you will, of him comes in, and then he rules for 300 or 400 years, and then he passes. If Ichita Ichina has ruled in full rather than through replacements, he's well over 2,500 years old. Now, that's a possibility because he is of cosmic and etheric nature. He could very well do that. We also, or I do, I know where he's located. And I've often wanted to go in there. I've gone down into Central America, and I've touched into those energies to see whether or not it's appropriate for me to go in and find him, and it has not been up to date. But more and more, I'm feeling that the time is coming closer when perhaps I can be allowed to go in there. You will find him in what is known as the north and western corner of Guatemala. And in this corner For instance, when military aircraft fly over and try to photograph this area, every photograph turns out white. In other words, it will not photograph. There's too much light down there. Many of the, for instance, the Indians, the Mayan Indians and what have you, and there's over 40,000 Indians who have disappeared in Guatemala because of the guerrilla war and all the things that have happened down there. Now we have to assume that many of them have gone into that area owned and operated by the one called Ichita Ichina. Now, he has an assistant, and his name is Chichisuma. Chichisuma is the one who rules all of South America. He himself, Ichita Ichina, pretty much his domain is in Central America and touches on up into the what we call the Yucatan. Now, Ichita Ichina plays a key role in any and all that's going to happen in the future. But let me give you a couple poignant examples, beginning with Walker Lake, Nevada, in the year of 1890. Again, I pointed out to you that this is part of military chronicles. It's all recorded at one place or another, and if you wish to research it, you may do so. Now, during the times in the 1800s, the late 1800s, our government was still very much concerned that the Indians might rise up again, and they had a frightening experience, suspect in nature, take place with one called Wovoka. Wovoka was a Paiute Indian, but he was a peaceful medicine man, and in meditation one day, in not a seance, but a meditation, he was given a dance, came from Great Spirit, and it was called the ghost dance. And it was a peaceful dance, and he thought that it would be a good idea to use this ghost dance to homogenize the people, bring them together, and make them peaceful, and to lay to rest this unrest which was amongst them and this warlike feeling that was among the braves, because there were many young warriors who still wanted to rally up and confront the government and cause another Indian war. So it was his aim and objective then, through the ghost dance, to bring peace once again to all tribes. So he began, of course, the sequence of what was known as ghost dances. Now the ghost dance had to take place on the full moon. The ghost dance also had to take place with a specially designed shirt, which you would wear, and it was exactly designed for the ghost dance itself. He was given that in dream state and so forth. He made one, and then everybody who participated in the dance had to wear that particular shirt. Now, when the government saw this, they looked upon it suspiciously, and they were right. They said that this dance will invite unto itself, and under the guise of the ghost dance, these young, truculent, warlike warriors could possibly come up with a courtier of resistance and, of course, cause a problem to our government. So they monitored it very closely. And as I said, their suspicions were somewhat founded because there were numbers within the Sioux, the Cheyenne, and some of the other warlike tribes who did go there to purposely use it as a guise to rally around their flag of aggression. Now, what happened, though, right in the midst of all of this, another very wonderful thing happened, and the news went out that the second coming of the Indian Messiah was about to happen. And it was to take place in Walker Lake. This was the year 1890. I don't remember, I think it was August. I can't remember the exact date. But nonetheless, our government heard about it, and they dispatched General Miles, Lieutenant Robinson, representatives of a Boston newspaper, Salt Lake City, Yuma, I think it was, and also Chicago. 3 major newspapers were there to witness and record this event. What happened was, all the Indians and Aboriginal people who could actually travel to be there, they gathered at Walker Lake in the expectancy of course, the Indian Messiah. What they did, they cleared a great circle, cleared it of all vegetation and so forth, and there was a huge rock in the center of it, which was natural in nature, and then they all sat out here, of course, on the periphery, waiting for the coming of the Messiah itself. Now, they'd been there for some weeks. I think it was close to 2 weeks, and nothing had happened, and there was still great expectation, but yet there was some rest because the Messiah had yet to come. One day, however, there was a flash in the middle of this cleared out circle, and in the flash was a then materialization of a personage of grandeur. That individual was not the Christ, but he was Ichita Ichinah. And Ichita Ichinah said to them as he walked out of the circle, he says, I am not the Christ, but the Christ is soon to be here. I'm here to tell you that he will be here momentarily. So he went outside the circle and he joined his people, and his people are known as the Chigarguans, Chiguargans, Chigarguans. Now, that name always strikes me because I always think of Chicago, you know, Cigar, Chicago. And of course, Chicago is an Indian name, just as Winnebago is. Not too long ago, a couple of years ago, when I was lecturing in Wisconsin, I found out what the true meaning of Winnebago is. You know what it is? Stinking lake. It's not a favorable name. The Indians, and there's a lake up there in Oshkosh, where I was actually lecturing. Once a year, that lake has fermentation from kelp and so forth. It's on the bottom of the lake, and it rises to the surface, and it stinks. And the Indians call it Lake Winnebago, Stinky Lake. And so now we have a mobile home called Winnebago. Okay, so anyhow, Ichita Ichinah then came out, joined his people, the Chigarguans, and they, of course, and all the other tribes and Aboriginal peoples who were there, then, of course, waited for the coming of the Messiah. Well, of course, it did happen. And he descended, believe it or not, and they say, and of course, all the things that are said about him, he actually descended from a spacecraft. Because there was a light in the heavens, and then he descended out of this light, which was obviously a spacecraft, and came down to this rock, you know, and materialized in a physical form. He sat there for the longest of times, and he contemplated deliberately. And of course, you could hear a pin drop around here. Nobody dared hardly breathe, let alone say something, you know. They're all scared to death. Now, remember what I had said earlier. I said that he had traveled all through the Americas and as far west as, of course, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. And he had taught all these tribes the principles of love. He had taught them the principles of godliness, so to speak. But almost to the man, and almost to every tribe, every one of them had negated his teachings. The only ones who had kept the precepts of what he had taught them was the tribes called the Chigarguans, and they had remained intact. After he had deliberated for some time, he said to them that he was very disappointed that they had not kept the tenets and the vows, which of course they had agreed to so long ago. And then, of course, he berated them. And finally, after he berated them, he says, now one more time, I'm going to form a council of 12 who will be the mediator council for all Indians and Aboriginal peoples throughout the world. And so he did so. Ironically, he selected 11 members of the Chigarguans. One person from the United States or the American Indians was selected, and he was a most unlikely candidate because he was a Cheyenne, a very warlike tribe. Yet this young man was a very pure medicine person, and he was worthy to be a part of that council. And so he was added to the 11 Chigarguans, and we now had a council of 12. And Ichita Ichinah was the one, of course, selected to head up this sacred council of 12. They then received their final instructions, of course, from the Messiah, deliberated with them for hours and hours, and finally, of course, that was the end of his visit. He was seen to ascend into the sky again and then take off in what could be termed a spacecraft. Yes?
Mm-hmm. But they were in North America?
They were what? In North America. Yeah, you know, you find them in Central America and South America. That's their domain. The other tribes, of course, whether it be the Cheyenne, the Sioux, and all these, of course, are in the southwest United States. None of them were selected other than this one man, this one young man. And get this one young man's name had a most unlikely name. His name was Porcupine. Porcupine. And he was the only one selected from all the tribes in the southwest United States, or the United States per se. Now, when the whole thing is ended, Porcupine dedicated the rest of his life to traveling from tribe to tribe to give the tribes the message that came from the Indian Messiah, which of course is you must not war anymore, you must walk in love and light and peace and all the things which he of course decreed and wanted for them. And then he was joined by another one, and he had the name of Sitting Bull. Not the Sitting Bull of renown that we know, who of course was a Sioux, but this one was he was a Arapaho, I believe. But he was by the name of Sitting Bull, and he and Porcupine spent the rest of their life traveling from tribe to tribe, imparting the great message which the Indian Messiah, or our Christ, had actually given to them during this meeting in 1890 at Walker Lake. I have a document which I have had for many years. I lost it, was stolen from me, and recently it came back into my possession. And the whole thing is dedicated to that great personage that we're talking about called Ichita Ichina. Now, after this whole thing was over with, this conclave was over with, Ichita Ichina went back into his regular place in Guatemala, and Chichisuba, of course, went back into his, which was in South America. And they stayed there from 1890 to 1939. And our second appearance, of course, is, and look at that, that's a master year. 1939 is a 22-4. And here we are coming up with 1993, just reverse it, you see, and we now have another master year of 22-4. So we can expect something great to happen here too. But in 1999, again, all of the Indian peoples and Aboriginal peoples met in Mexico. Now, what is that? 1939. Yeah, 1890. So let's take a look at that. 1890, 40 years later, right. Ichita once again came out of hiding, and he met with all the Indians in a place called Pichacaro. And there's two lakes down there, twin lakes, Pichacaro and Michoacan. And they're north, I think it's north and west of Mexico City. And that's where the conclave was. And they met there. And at that time, Ichita Ichina was elected by all Aboriginal Indian peoples as the great white chief of all of the Indian Aboriginal peoples. And he holds that title even today. Now, he is back in his respective place where he stays. It's a world which is apart from ours. There isn't anybody that can get in there unless, of course, he wants them. And if you ever got in there, first you'd have to go through a very hostile element of Indians who are basically headhunters. So he surrounded himself with some very, very good oppositional forces. The Guatemalan government has tried to get in there for many, many years, and they never have been able to successfully negotiate it. And there's a spiritual power in there which is far greater than anything we can muster here on earth. Okay, now, Ichita Ichina is due to come out again in the future, and with this we'd have to get into Indian prophecy, which I'm about to do. Again, I want to mention to you, if you get a chance, get the book that I mentioned, He Walked the Americas, because it's a most wonderful book. It's beautifully illustrated. Taylor Hanson has done an exemplary job in documenting, if you will, the legendary Indian Messiah and his trek throughout the world, particularly the Americas, and by the many different names, of course, which I indicated, Quetzalcoatl, Tecopa, Isicoto, Jesus, and others. Ganawida being another one. One thing that I failed to mention at the beginning, and I should have, in an indirect way, I think I've pretty well established it, but there isn't anything that the Indian or Aboriginal peoples do that is without measure or tempo or vibration or consciousness. The simple revving of a gourd, such as you see right here, has a rhythm, and of course it's eons old. It goes back to the time before the planet itself was in a state of solidity. So it may appear that these dumb savages are doing something and just wailing, but that's not so. Every step, everything is by measure, everything has a decree. It causes something to happen, not only in their consciousness, but yours and the planet. You must never, never take for granted anything that they do as being barbaric or basic or what have you. It is of the most profound nature. Remember what I said about the little Aborigine medicine man who saved the life of John Glenn. He knew exactly what he was doing, in tempo, in spirit, in mind. And this is true of all Indians and Aboriginal peoples. Some of the stories that I could tell you of my experiences with them, both here in the southwest United States and in Mexico, Yucatan, and Central America, are unbelievable. And sometimes I wonder how I ever walked away, with a full skin. Obviously, I was divinely protected. Judy and I were talking in the early part of it, and of course we come basically from the same school, I think, in tempo, and nothing's done easy. We make it difficult. We're very reluctant about getting involved in something, but when we do, we're committed. In the meantime, we may make some mistakes, and we may get there the hard way, but once we get there, we're there. I'm not prone to jump into something feet first, or if I do, my mind and my subconscious mind and everything else is in full operation, and I'm appraising what it is I'm about to get in. I don't go in blind. I never have. Even in combat, I never went in blind. My senses are about me. Even though it may appear that I'm being rash and foolish, I'm not. I learned so much from the Indians in terms of measure, in terms of tempo, in terms of deliberation and so forth, because all these things are very important, especially in our lives right now. The bottom line of any and all of this is one simple word, and it's a very prevalent one that I teach in Europe, and over there they call it balance. Balance. Stay balanced, and then you are in measure, and then you are in synchronization with incoming Christ consciousness and spirit, and you cannot go wrong. The Indians, of course, do it automatically. All right, I want to begin first with the Mayan prophecy. Are you willing to go, say, 15 minutes over time today? Is that permissible? Let me see the hands. I don't want to do anything. Looks like the majority. All right. I don't want to hold you too long because I have things to do too. We have to pack up. We have a dinner engagement, and so I want to get you out here at a decent time. But if it happens to run over 15 minutes, I just want to get your permission to do so. Okay, let's begin. We're talking about prophecy now. And of course, there's many areas that I have not covered that normally it takes me 2 days to do this presentation, to go into in-depth detail. So what you're getting right now is an overlighting, you might say, of what I normally give. But one of the most important things, particularly in the now, is to understand prophecy. First of all, let me declare prophecy. Prophecy is nothing more than a warning. Prophecy is not meant to come true. Prophecy is a flag which is being waved to get your attention, to say, if you don't do thus and so, this is what's going to happen for you. Now, if you take Edgar Cayce, Nostradamus, or any of the greats in the past who have prognosticated or predicated something, and you take it as the truth, you can bet your sweet bippy it's going to happen, and it will, because you have anchored it in your own thought processes, and it will become what we call reality. If you say in the moment, though, I don't believe that, it's not going to happen to me, and what have you, you change the scenario, and it does not happen. Now, there are some prophecies which are basically absolute in nature. And one of those is the one I'm about to talk about, and that is the Mayan prophecy. The Mayan calendar and the Mayan prophecy has yet to err. It has never made a mistake. It has always come dramatically true. Every other great seer and what have you has made mistakes. Or perhaps it is that we have changed it for them, which we have in many instances. No, if a bad thought, I'll give you a little secret here. One of the ways I stay in balance, and I'm constantly being bombarded with negative energies when I'm up here and talking and what have you, I have a cute little saying which I use, which is most effective. And when I feel an energy coming from somebody in my audience, or some exterior thought is coming in and trying to invade me, Richard, this is for you too, I do a very simple thing, and I should have told you before, but I go through this little rote which states that you do not compute. Right there, you do not compute. Now I say, transmute, 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 get out of here, be on your way. It's done. The minute that a negative thought, sexual or anything else, arises in my mind, and I don't want it to reside in my house, I transmute it right there on the spot, so that it cannot take command of me, cannot anchor in my persona, cannot be a part of me. And it's such a simple thing to do, and it makes life much simpler for you. So there it is. You do not compute. Transmute, transmute, transmute. Okay, and boy, does it work. Yeah, your choice. Okay. All right, the Mayan prophecy states this, and it's so apropos in our times, and you'll see when I give it to you, then we look around and see what's happening in the world. The Mayan prophecy states, the government, science, and religion will collapse if they do not accommodate incoming spirit or consciousness. That's simple. Government, science, and religion. They single them out and say they will collapse if they cannot accommodate incoming spirit or consciousness. In other words, we're talking about the Christ consciousness. Now, I want you to take quickly into your minds a review of what's happened in the world in the last 5 years. Who was it, Jimmy Baker? Oh, Jimmy Baker ended up in jail, you know. There's Mr. Swaggart, one of his cohorts. He ended up in a financial fiasco. There was another a man, what was his name? Roberts? Not Oral Roberts, but I think it was Roberts, Oral Roberts. And a couple others who were great evangelists and what have you. And all of a sudden, everything about them collapsed. You know, they ended up in, not ignominy, but they ended up in despair. I think the greatest of all of it, of course, was the Jimmy Baker affair, which was a true indication of what the Mayan prophecy said was true. Organized religion is collapsing around our ears, including the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is no more. They're broke, number one. People are not owed any money like they used to, in the degree they used to. And besides that, one of their own members stole most of the money and gave it to the ones known as the Illuminati. You know, that was, what, about 10 years ago when that attorney took off the bundle, you know. They lost it right then and there. Another indication that religion is over. Take a look at your governments. Look what recently happened to the Soviet Union, now Russia. Look what happened to Romania, Czechoslovakia, and all through that bloc country, you see. These governments have summarily collapsed. Look at East Germany. Again, here is the Mayan prophecy and predictions coming true. The only thing that hasn't happened to date is, of course, science. And the Mayans say, these very learned people, again, those dumb savages, Indians, you know, not so dumb, are they? Anyhow, these great people said that science will become religion and religion will become science. And it's true. It will. When we can marry up the two, then we have a roller coaster, if you will, to go home. Maybe a better word for that would be an escalator, you know, to go home. The science, it has a long ways to go, but there are young people, young physicists and scientists and what have you, who are contesting the old paradigms that supposedly were infallible. And they're telling the guys who originated these things, you're all wet. That's not where it is at all. It should be this way. And so they begin to pursue that. And out of that have come things such as quarks. What the heck is a quark? But nevertheless, it's a very fundamental part of physics today. All these things that we considered at one time to be sacred, immovable objects of a kind, you know, are now falling around our ears, even in the field of science. The only difference between science, religion, and, of course, government is that science seems to be able to accommodate this and balance it out so that there is a progressive growth. And that's very much in our favor, that they can do that, because it would be devastating if all three were to collapse at the same time. We see some, I was talking yesterday about major changes taking place in Russia, former Soviet Union. They are in bed, if you will, with the extraterrestrials. The extraterrestrials are coming down amongst them and interfacing and interacting with them, particularly with their young people. Yesterday I told the group that they are now invading the schools. They're teaching the children what they think is, or not think, they know, are true mathematics and science and things like this, physics. And they're saying that all that we're teaching our children, in other words, our hypotheses and so forth, are all wet. And so they're openly changing the school system in the Soviet Union or Russia right now. Now the children can see these teachers who take over from the regular teacher. Some of the teachers are now beginning to see them. But what most of the teachers see is the writing appearing on the blackboard, you know, but they don't see the person in the hand writing it. The children do. And now, as I've said, some of the teachers are beginning to perceive it also. So there is an ongoing, if you will, instruction taking place of an extraterrestrial nature in the Soviet Union right now, or Russia. I have Russian friends, and we come together periodically, at least once a year, and they share these things with me. It's ironical that it can't be our country, and as I said yesterday, it's just a damn shame that the United States government has to be the laggard in this whole thing when they really could be the leader. But they've chosen the Russian people as opposed to our own. Okay, so there's the Mayan prophecy and indications that indeed it is working. Now let's talk about the Mayan calendar quickly and give you some insight on that. How many people have ever studied the Mayan calendar? Anybody? Okay, all right, fine. Some of you have a basic understanding of it. Within the Mayan calendar, which also connects with the prophecy, we have 13 heavens, or we might say we also have 13 lords of light, and we have 9 hells. And of course that comes up with the magic number, the one that we're in this year, a 22 or 22-4. So the two numbers are, numerologically, they are master numbers. Each one of these is equal to 52 years. So you take 13 times 52, and that gives you, of course, the reign of the lords of light. You have 615, you have 52. So you end up with 676 years of reign and enlightenment by the lords, the 13 lords of heaven, 676 years. And then you go into 9 hells, and you've got, of course, 52 again, and take 9 times that is 18, 46, 468 years, of course, reign of the Lord of darkness, who is the brother of the Lord of light. Add those two together, 468, and you have 14, 4, 700, no, beg your pardon, what am I? 1144 is the total number. 1144 is the duration of the Mayan calendar. Now that ended in, as I told you yesterday, that ended August the 16th, 1987. That was the last of the Mayan calendar as written. And what it says from that point on, August the 16th, 1987, in prophecy, the Mayan prophecy, that from this date on, we are on our own. We've been kicked out of the nest, as I said yesterday. They taught us to crawl, they taught us to walk, they taught us to run. They said, I've taught you everything I can teach you. Now go out there and do it yourself. It's like the eaglet. Mother and father eagle will sustain it up to a point when it's time to leave the nest. And what they'll do, most times, they will kick them out of the nest, and they have to fly. And if they are to survive, they must, of course, flap their wings, and then finally they find out they can do it, and then, of course, everything is hunky-dory. Same thing is true of us at this point. We must learn to fly. We must rise up to the realization, indeed, we are gods. We are gods in amnesia. We are gods who have been wrongfully placed here on one level, and we are gods who are ready to go home. The acceptance of that, of course, individually is entirely up to you, whether you can believe the things that I'm saying, that you are gods in amnesia. Again, remember what I said. Jesus said it over 2,000 years ago, know ye not that ye are gods. Something else that Jesus said, which is very apropos today, and of course I love to quote his sayings and quotations. He said, basically, the rudiments of it was, these things I do, ye shall do even greater. Now we look upon him and look at the miraculous things he did. And what it's saying is, in the next 7 years, you're going to do the things that he did, and some of them will do, or some of you, I should say, will do them even greater than he did. What a wonderful inspiration and a wonderful future for all of us if we want to do it. But it's entirely up to you how far you wish to go with it, you know. You can fill your karma, as many of us have or are, you know, that's fine. But once you fill your karma, then there's other work to do, and what you do with it is entirely up to you. Okay, so that's the basics of the Mayan calendar. 13 heavens, 9 hells. The last Lord of Darkness, and that's ruled, all the hells are ruled by Lords of Darkness, and they are the brothers of the Lords of Light. But the last Lord of Darkness was the one we knew as Hitler. His reign, of course, the last Lord of Darkness, and his reign began in 1935, and it ended in 1987. And as I told you yesterday, the one who played that role as the last Lord of Darkness was none other than the one we knew as Hitler. Hitler, of course, died somewhere right around here. He died in his 90s. He didn't die in the bunker, as many of us, of course, were taught to believe. Okay, now, the Mayan prophecy leads into another prophecy, which is actually more ancient than the Mayan prophecy itself. The only distinction I would like to make with the Mayan prophecy is that it has never made an error. Recently, October the 12th of last year, we ended the tunnel of darkness. We had a period of 500 years, and would you believe that that began with the advent of Columbus discovering America. And it ended October the 12th, 1992. Now, we are out of the out of the tunnel of darkness. We are now all standing in the light, but that does not mean that we're home free, because these lords of darkness are like a snake in its death throes. It's still dangerous, you see. Its thrashing and so forth is causing great unrest. It's causing disturbances and unsettlements in people's lives today. You can look right around here in Sedona and see it. I know people in this audience, horrendous things they're going through. It's an opportunity for us to set aside things which, of course, we've harbored and hung on to too long. I, too, am going through the same things. I'm going into new things, but I'm also releasing old things. Each and every one of you are doing this at this point. It's a time to set aside the old and get ready, or to partake of the new. You know, this holds particularly true to emotional entanglements with former mates. You know, Judy and Richard and I were talking this morning. Of course, lo and behold, the scepter and the ghost of, it's a live ghost, however, of my former association, who I thought was my wife, and I come to find out I wasn't married to her at all. She's risen again, you know, and is, in a sense, is causing me to react in very simple ways. But what they are, all of them are signals for me to go beyond that. Same thing is true of you. Those of you who are having emotional upheavals and entanglements and so forth, it's cleansing time. You're out of the tunnel of darkness. You're now standing in the light. You have to realize it. You have to accommodate the light before these other things, of course, will pass away. You're getting ready for graduation. And as I said earlier, it's such a great blessing. So the rest is up to you again. I didn't know about this tunnel of darkness until my Indian friends told me. And they asked me to take part in a ceremony which they're going to hold in the Yucatan, Palenque. Of course, I was going to be in Europe and I couldn't partake of it. But I did share it to the world and with the world every place I went, particularly in Europe at that time. And of course, it makes a lot of sense, you know. And but we're pretty soon we will be home free. Now, the next prophecy I want to go into, of course, I've glossed over very lightly on the Mayan prophecy. Incidentally, I have a 3-day course that I teach on the Mayan calendar and Mayan prophecy also. Now, I have this on slides, but I don't know how that's wet. What are we doing? Okay. I have this on slides, including the Mayan calendar and the prophecy and everything, which I take to Europe with me and teach, but we'll use this old board that, this is the one that Jean photographed for me, that put on a slide for me. This is one of the most true prophecies there is. This is the Hopi prophecy. Now, I had to go back into the past to bring you up to date on this whole thing. There was a time just before Atlantis sank when all of us were facing oblivion and were facing total demise. And at that point, we were abandoned by the rulers of Atlantis, who incidentally were the Palladians. And I always had a suspicion about them, and it wasn't until I went back that I discovered why. But they had been the most recent rulers in Atlantis, and they had proliferated the atmosphere so intense with nuclear fallout due to nuclear explosions that there was no chance to survive other than leaving the planet or seeking refuge within the Earth itself. They, of course, chose to jump in their little itsy-bitsy ships, and they all took off and said, "Bye, boys, see you later," and they took off for the Pleiades. That left the majority of us here upon the planet to fare for ourselves. We owe a deep debt of gratitude to ones that we know today as the Hopi Indians. The Hopi Indians at that time were the sacred firekeepers of Atlantis. I remember being there, and I know others in my life who were there at that time also. Nonetheless, the sacred firekeepers said, "Well, we don't have to perish unless you want to. Follow me, and I will take you into a safe haven." At that point, we followed them into the inner earth. Now, I'm not going to go into detail because there's a lot more to this. For instance, it's associated with the Deiros and the Teros and other denizens of the inner earth that I talk about normally when I have more time. But let's say that they were the ones, the Indians we know today as the Hopis, were the ones who took us into the inner earth to ride out the cleansing of the atmosphere due to nuclear fallout. Now, would you believe that we spent 580 years under the earth? Not on top of the earth with the sun and what have you, 580 years, one generation after another, we stayed down in the subterranean earth. Now, each and every time we had an opening, which of course we would send birds up to test the atmosphere, and if the bird didn't come back, then it was pretty clear that the atmosphere was not yet clear. But the one bird that they finally sent out, it was the most unlikely bird to bring the message back. It's like the dove did upon Noah's Ark. In this case, it was a magpie. Of all things, a raucous magpie. They're one of the most offensive birds in the world. They're always fussing and what have you. But nonetheless, the magpie went up and came back with a sprig of earth to denote that the surface was now clean and clear. We then emerged, but not without a little bit of difficulty at first. Now, from where we were on the floor of this cave, subterranean cave that we were in, it was hundreds of feet. In fact, it said it was about 500 feet to the hole in the surface of the cave itself, which was our outlet onto the surface of the earth once again. The question is, how do we negotiate that? Well, if you can believe the Indian prophecy and all the things associated with that, we grew a bamboo. I did that. We grew a bamboo. And we climbed up the bamboo to the surface of the earth and, of course, emerged in a place called Black Mesa, Ariabi, up in the Hopi land. Now, I see, or might be, I'm not seeing it, but I have an idea there's some incongruity in your mind about growing a bamboo plant 500 feet to the surface in order to get out. Let me remind you of a sect in Japan that is current today that is called the Green Dragon Society. The Green Dragon Society is the highest society in Japan. They are adepts
They have secrets that have been long last for the most part to mankind. Secrets that go beyond the Rosicrucians, the Masons, or any of these other brotherhoods that you might be associated or know others who are associated with. In the final initiation to become an adept in the Green Dragon Society, they give you the final test. They take a pot, they place a seed in it. There was a plant seed. They cover it with earth. They set it down before you and tell you within 15 minutes you have to germinate that seed, grow a plant, and put it in full blossom. Now that's some feat, huh? Yet they do it. Again, they do it with their mind. And they cause that plant to go through this germination process and growth process and blossom process all in 15 minutes. When they can do that, then they become the master adept. Now, the Hopis and many of the Indians themselves are, never disbelieve it, they are master adepts. And at that time, they did germinate the seed, of course, of a bamboo plant, cause it to grow to great heights, and we have a ladder from which, with which to emerge from the subterranean earth. When we came out of the earth, the first thing we saw is what you see before you right here. This is the Hopi prophecy. Now, there is one other version of it, and I could put it in here, but I didn't. There is one blank over here. There's nothing here in the first blank. That's the state of unknowingness before we had consciousness as mankind. I pick it up here with the consciousness of mankind, and we take it from there. Let me now explain to you what this means. The great being you see right here is Great Spirit. And you notice the Great Spirit over here in his right hand, he has the bow, and over here the arrow. So what he's saying is that the Indians, particularly the Hopis, they must live the traditionalist way. They must always keep traditional ways and belief systems and so forth in order to be one with Great Spirit. You notice in his other hand he has a staff, which of course is double in nature, here and here. And this depicts something very prophetic that has already taken place and is going to take place. Some of it's not finalized yet. But take a look at the rings which you see right here in this first compartment. You notice that one ring is half above and half below the straight line here, the bottom of this particular block. That indicates the First World War. It's already taken place. It's now in a settlement state. It's balanced out, half and up and half down. The next one, of course, is logically, and it is that. It's the Second World War. It took place, and it has been settled. It is in a state of conclusion. But look at the third ring that we looked at here. It's sitting above the line. It is not half up and half down. Now, the significance of that is that there will be no Third World War. They will not allow a Third World War for the simple reason that we are in the process of graduating as a planet and as a people from the third dimension to the fourth and fifth dimension. I told you that yesterday. Here's a signification of that very thing that I was telling you yesterday. There will be many small wars, such as we're having in Iraq and, of course, Yugoslavia and all over the world, in Laos and Cambodia and so forth. These things are going to go on. But there will be no more major wars for fear that we destroy the planet. And as I told you yesterday, we cannot, or they cannot, the guardian forces, the divine, will not allow that, because we must join the sisterhood and brotherhood of planets. There are 11 other planets up there, some merely waiting for us at this very moment. The only one that is yet to join them is this one known as planet Earth. We are in the process at this time of graduating. When we do, and we join the sisterhood and brotherhood of planets, then we as an entire solar system will graduate then into the fourth and fifth dimension, and that will be the end of the consciousness as we know it here now. So the prophecy is that there will not be a Third World War. Now, the most likely place for it to be attempted and perpetrated would be, again, in the Middle East. It's so volatile and unstable and so forth, and if we're not careful, it could happen there. Nonetheless, it's not going to. It was a very interesting scenario and dialogue I had with the Guardian Forces of Space Brothers some years ago. What happened was, it's about the same time that they took me under the Bermuda Triangle. Following that, I had an ongoing liaison with these people. And I said, you know, I'm concerned about the Middle East. There's something about the Middle East that's very unsettled. And it seems to me that mankind's destiny, if they're ever settled in the proper way, it must be dealt with in the areas of the Middle East. And they said, you're right. And I said, well, I'd like to pursue that further. I'd like to ask you some questions. And so we began a dialogue, and I played the devil's advocate. And I said, first of all, I asked a question to confirm this. I said, will there be a third world war? Now, mind you, I'm talking to the extraterrestrials, to my ship and what have you. And the answer was unequivocally no. We will not allow a third world war. And I said, well, will you allow nuclear weapons of some sort or some form or limitation of nuclear war? And much to my surprise, it blew my mind, they said yes. I said, what do you mean? I said, you told me there would be no third world war, and now you're saying that there will be permission to use nuclear weapons. And so what they did, they qualified at that time. They said, we will allow limited use of nuclear weapons. There was tactical applications. Now, all major governments have tactical applications of nuclear weapons. When I was a Green Beret, I was one of the chosen within the Green Berets to assemble and disassemble a portable, and I get this, a portable atomic bomb. It was a 3-man load. Each of us carried 80 pounds, and we could parachute it to any place in the world, any major city, what have you. We could plant that silly thing, have enough time to leave, and we could destroy a city the size of Los Angeles. Now, that's back in the 50s. Can you imagine what they have today? You know, with all the sophistication in terms of computerization and electronic boards and what have you, they must have something that can fit in their hip pocket. So there is, what I'm saying to you, there is such a thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. And so they would then, they said, allow tactical nuclear weapons to be used in the Middle East. And I said, well, all right, that's fine. Now, suppose it gets out of control and is threatening a third world war. What will you do? They said, well, we'll stop it. And I said, well, how do you propose to do that? And it was most interesting because they said what they're going to do is to put a holograph that can be seen all over the Middle East of what we would probably presuppose to be God or Allah or whatever. This grandfather patriarchal face would appear up there and say, enough, cease and desist. And I said, well, that's interesting, you know. And I said, what will happen then? Well, if they don't, we'll do something else. And I said, what will it be? We'll freeze the battlefield. You're going to freeze the battlefield? That's interesting. Tell me how. So then they explained that what they would do, as the soldier, for instance, is about to throw a grenade, just about the time he gets in the position, you see, to throw one, there he is. He's locked in. The grenade stays in his hand. Even if it's in a firing mode, it will remain there, and everything will be status quo. If I'm firing a rifle and the shell, or the bullet's projectile at this point goes out, and if it just stays right here, it's frozen in space and time and does nothing. Same with artillery or anything else, which is enactment at that time. It will be frozen into a state of inoperativeness. Okay, so that's to get their attention. And I said, well, let's play the devil's advocate a little bit more. Suppose they go on and say, to hell with you. What are you going to do? Well, this is most interesting. They said that they would warn the proponents, the antagonists, protagonists, and what have you, in the battle area once more to cease and desist, and this holographic figure would speak of that. And if they didn't adhere to, at that time, they said they would dematerialize totally the battlefield. There wouldn't be anything in terms of people, weaponry, and what have you that would be there in a split second. And at that point, they would give the world governments a warning. If you people cannot get together and take care and clean up your own act, we'll come down there and do it for you. And I said, does that mean that then you would interfere with our free will and come down and take over if you must? And the answer was yes. Now, they said to me at that time, too, that they would hope never to have to do that. But they will not, under any circumstances, allow us to destroy this planet. Because it's essential that we marry up with our brethren and sisters so that we, as a planet and as a solar system, can graduate into the fourth and fifth dimension. We no longer are in control, whether you like to believe it or not. They are, and they will exact that control if they must. Okay, so then I will come back to the chart. No third world war. If there's the possibility that there will be, the extraterrestrials will take care of it, and they will null it and negate it, and it will not happen. Let's take a look at this second block over here. We notice that we have some happy people here. The most sacred thing to the Hopis, and most Indians, but particularly the Hopis, is corn. And that's represented here, as you can see, corn, corn. And look at the great smiles in their face, you know. This is the traditional Indian who is living in a traditional way. His main staple, of course, is corn. Corn is also an indicator of great wealth, you know. You notice, too, that any of you have been associated with the Hopis, they have varied colors of corn. You've got blue corn, you've got yellow corn, you've got white corn, there's red corn, and what have you. And they grow all these different varieties, and each one has a spiritual context or meaning, you say. So it's very sacred to them. So the traditional Indian is in concert with the Great Spirit. He has the great wealth, of course, of his corn, and he's a very happy man, and he will pass from this planet in a very happy state. But look up here at the top, and here we have some more individuals up here. What we're looking at here is the white man and the, I guess you would call him the contemporary Indian. This is the Indian in the making, who ain't doing so well, you say. Notice that their heads are detached. They're not attached like these individuals down here. They're detached. Notice also that in time that will peter out and be no more. That's what's indicated here. They are not lasting, whereas these Indians and this spirit is. We're looking here at some of the Indians who have bought into the white man's way. For instance, Peabody Mining Company, exploiting all the resources of the Indian reservations. Many others up there mining uranium and other things, which of course are proponents and elements for making war, or things which are not in harmony with nature and also with the people. So concurrently we have the two going on, the traditionalists and we have the modernists. And in that, of course, we have the white man and the other elements of the Indians called the modernists. Sadly enough, there's been a great war going on between the two. And when I first got involved with the Hopis, shortly before I became involved with them, brother began to kill brother. They actually shot one another, you know. And of course, this sacredity, or the great sacredness of the Hopi people, I think, was in a state of disarray, if not destruction at that point. That's not to say, as I said earlier, that deep within the inner core of the Hopi nation, there is not that pure element of Indians who, of course, are the eldest of brothers and the sacred leaders of the future, spiritual leaders of the future. Let's pass now down here to what we see here, and these are called indicators. Here's a gourd. That's a gourd taken right out of the garden with the seeds in it and so forth, and here it is right here. And so the Indians say that when the great gourd appears in the skies and rains its ashes upon the earth, then the time to the end is near. Anybody know what that is? It was the atomic bomb, the explosion of the first atomic bomb. Now get this silly thing was here when we came out of the subterranean earth thousands and thousands of years ago. How did they know? Who put it there? I was telling Judy yesterday, it's sad, when you go up to the Hopi Reservation right now, you know where this is right now? In the middle of a garbage dump. These non-traditional Indians are using it as a refuge and garbage dump. And they have, through the acidity and so forth, caused by that garbage and what have you, this is almost totally erased. There's faint semblances of it, of course, in the original rock and state. Sad, sad, sad. Okay, come up here. And we have, they said, for instance, start here. The Indians said, when the highways appear in the sky, the end is near. What do you think that is? Yeah, the contrails of the jet aircraft that pass over, the highways in the sky. They also said that when the giant spider spins its web over the face of the earth, the end is near. Anybody know what that is? Power lines. Now, if you look up, if you're flying, up in the heavens or the air, and you're looking down upon the earth, and you see these congested power lines, indeed it does look like a spider web, with the sun reflecting on them and so forth. So they said the spider web. The greatest of all signs, of course, was the inversion or bastardization, if you will, of the symbol, the one used, of course, by the Nazis, the swastika. The swastika is the most sacred sign next to the circle that the Indians can possibly use. And Hitler, of course, did take the swastika and he inverted it and bastardized it, and there was the last sign that the time for the end is near. So it's a very prophetic prophecy, holds a lot of truth in it, and of course is profound in nature. Any questions on this? Yes, dear. Well, sure, there are some of us. What we're talking about here are the white people who are into self-aggrandizement, using others and so forth, accompanied, of course, with I suppose, the Aboriginal and Indian peoples too, but certainly the Indian people. No, it doesn't, not really. In this case, it has something to do with race because it's the Hopi prophecy, and these aberrant individuals up here, of course, are Hopi in nature. But it's also a message for all of mankind. For those of us, if you look at the ultimate message of this petroglyph, it's simply that those of us who remain in balance and concert and harmony and communications with God, we need not worry. And that's what that simply is all about, The Hopis, of course, are the Great Spirit, and this is the Great Spirit. Gave us indicators to indicate when the time is near. And I think we're damn fools if we don't, adhere to it and accept it as being not only possibility, but reality. Okay, now I would like to move into the ultimate Indian prophecy. And this is not published. You're not going to find it any place in a published form. But it comes from the Indian lore and memorabilia, not written, but the stuff I have been given over the years, as the Indians see it and what's going to happen in the near future to our United States. I'm not talking at this point, I'm not talking about the world per se. I'm only relegating this to what is known as the Americas at this point. In the year 1995 or 1976, I cut a tape. It was 3 or 4 hours in duration that had to do with the earth changes worldwide. I dealt with every country. I went into detail here in our United States, and I gave an analogy state by state. And it was a very frightening thing. It was given to me while I was working with the Pueblo Indians. And I began to talk about it, and I was asked if I wouldn't go forth and share it with interested groups throughout the United States, which I did. Later, I stopped it because, to me, it was so full of negativity, it was so full of fright and gloom that I didn't feel it was appropriate at that point to pursue it, to continue to pursue it. What I didn't have at that time were the answers which were needed to offset the gloom aspects of what I was saying. Today, of course, I do have alternatives. I give those respectively when I, of course, talk about the great changes ahead. Recently, Barbie and Michael have asked me to, for the purposes of filming later on, we'll begin with an audio tape and to cut a new tape on the coming earth changes. And I'm going to do that probably this week. It will be in audio form, and I will make that immediately available to the public. I will not, at this point, unless of course I'm directed to do so, to go into detailed things about the earth changes. As I talked about them yesterday, I told you, and I've told the world over, that earth changes are inevitable. they're going to happen with or without you. Where you are in terms of survival is entirely up to you. Each one of you, if you can walk and talk and be one with God, the Creator and Source, you will never have to worry about survival. You will either leave your body summarily and join your sisters and brothers of the light, or you will, of course, take the body that you're currently in and you'll step from one dimension, the third dimension, automatically into the fourth dimension, and you will be spared the adversities which many others will experience. The whole thing is contingent upon you. None other can dictate this for you. You must do it. Your state of consciousness is your ticket from here in these times ahead in terms of adversity. The degree with which you can be one with God or the Creator or Great Spirit, call it what you will dictate your survival modus operandi. It's entirely up to you. You know, when you lose fear, in other words, fear of losing this body is nothing. It's nothing more than a vehicle to do the Lord's work. We must love it, we must respect it, because it is sacred in terms that it houses the Spirit, which of course is the utmost and the ultimate. But it is the least thing of you. The only thing that's real about you at this point in time, at any given moment, is that divine spark which is within you. And if you can concentrate on that divine spark of divinity which is within you, your assurance of safety is there. You never have to worry about it. Live each day as though it's the first day and the last. And then, of course, if you know that, you're going to do your very best, hopefully, you know. And if you do that, then, of course, you're certainly assured of survival. Now, let's talk about the ultimate Indian prophecy, which basically also relates to the very things we're talking about, survival. It is said, of course, that there will be major earth changes taking place. It's inevitable. And believe it or not, they're going to happen when you least expect it. There is a time frame for it, but you and I don't know it. The only one who really knows it, of course, is God itself, the Creator, and those who are privy to this information. I don't think at this point in time that there is a set date and a set time. I think it will be evaluated as to when and where it will occur. In other words, what is the most appropriate time, so to speak, to pull the plug, you know, and let it happen. I think the only time they will do that is when they are sure, or are assured, that there are no more souls to be harvested. At that point, they say, well, they've done their very best. We've done our very best. I guess we now can turn it loose and let it happen. And that's when they'll do it. But who knows when it's going to be? Jesus said, as I told you yesterday, he said, I shall come like a thief in the night. And that's just the way the earth changes are going to take place. They will come unexpectedly like a thief in the night. So be prepared at any given moment. All right, I want to pick this up now after the earth changes, which I said certainly will happen. Let me take a couple minutes here to convey one more thing to you. I said this time that there will be no destruction of the earth per se, in other words, through Third World War or flipping of the axis. The axis is not going to be flipped again, as it has been in the past over 330 times. There will be, as I said, dramatic earth changes, and they will be horrendous in nature. But what they're talking about this time is what they call a lithospheric displacement. Litho, L-I-T-H-O, spheric, like this is a sphere, T-H-E-R-E-I-C. So it's a lithospheric displacement. Now, what does that mean in common language? It means that here we have the axis, like this, and then we have here built into the planet and from the axis and what have you, we have an electromagnetic break, which is somewhere in here. Here we have 90 degrees, so forth and so forth, total 360. Somewhere around, I would say, 38 to maybe 45 degrees. I don't know exactly where, neither do they, but there is an electromagnetic break that's built in. Now, we know that the planet is already beginning to tip its axis. And as time goes on in these next 7 years, that acceleration will speed up so that at a given moment, we as a planet will reach an intensity which will be far greater than anything we could comprehend at this point. And what will happen is that this ship will go over here and it will impact at a high rate of acceleration, which is built in electromagnetic brakes. At that point, when this impact takes place, like this, and it speeds up and hits, when it hits with such great impact, it'll rebound, like this. Now, momentarily, when it makes that rebound, the topography of the planet will be redistributed. Instantaneously, in the twinkling of an eye, where there was once an ocean, there'll be a desert. When there was once a desert, there'll be an ocean, and what have you. All things, in the twinkling of an eye, will be rearranged. Now, you can imagine what's going to happen to mankind in general. In other words, you and I on the surface of the planet, because we're going to be affected by all this. There will be tsunamis. There'll be earthquakes. And all the things that, of course, could possibly take place at that time in the form of upheaval will do it, and all things in the twinkling of an eye will be redistributed in the proper form and shape which was originally intended for. So that's how the earth changes are going to take place dramatically. They'll begin slowly, but in the final analysis, they'll be sudden and abrupt. Okay, now let's assume this is over. Let's now go into the ultimate Indian prophecy. The ultimate Indian prophecy concerns the great one I spoke of previously called Ichita Ichina. And you will find this in any literature that you are fortunate enough to lay your hands on. You will find that he is going to ride out. He's not going to be involved in the earth changes. He's in a safe area. You know, because of the high rate of consciousness and so forth, they will be spared all the adversity of the upcoming devastation that others might face. Now, according to what has been told in the ultimate Indian prophecy, now I'm not an artist and I'm not pretending to be, but this is the United States, okay? Looks something like it's got a pimple on it. This would be Florida, of course. This would be New England, and of course this is the regular expanse of our United States. Yeah. Okay. So anyhow, there's where it is. Now, down here, where's Alaska? It's up here. A little bit over here, I think. Right over here. Okay. Now, Alaska will, incidentally, Canada, Alaska, and all these will be affected also. But I'm talking now basically about the United States. This, what you see right here, of course, would be down through Mexico, Yucatan, down into Central America, and that's where he is. He's down right in here, Central America. When the earth changes have taken place and reached the final state, at least for the United States, it is said that the United States, as we know it, geographically will be redistributed into 4 quadrants. So there will be 4 separate parts of now, what is the United States, later will be divided into 4 parts. Now, these lines of division that you see here represent great bodies of water. For instance, this is a major north-south river, which is also fed by Canada, but it also is fed by the 5 Great Lakes, the Missouri River, the Mississippi River, the St. Lawrence River. All the watersheds and tributaries and waterbeds that are in this general area are going to become one major confluence which will run from north to south into the Gulf of Mexico. That's one major river. Now that's going to be, what a big river, all that water. But look at this. We have another one, an east-west river that goes from coast to coast, east coast to west coast. Now that is, I think to give you some idea of what this is a cleft. This is a fissure, if you will, in the surface of the earth. And that fissure will run all the way from the east coast to the north, or to the west coast, and then it will fill up with surficial and also subterranean water, so that it too becomes a great river. So now we have 2 great rivers. Interesting enough, when I teach the hollow earth and the inner earth, how many have ever heard me do that? Yes, good. All right. In the hollow earth, I tell you that the kingdom within the hollow earth, believe it or not, is divided into 4 quadrants like this, and is constituted of 4 great rivers. Some of them even have, for instance, biblical names. For instance, one river in the inner earth is called the Euphrates. That's a river in Egypt, okay? One is called Pison. It sounds rather Italian to me. And then there's 2 other great rivers that, of course, constitute this inner earth complex. So we're going to have on the surface what we have in the hollowness of the earth itself. Someday I'd like to give a talk here in town on those 2 subjects, the inner earth and, of course, the hollow earth. Okay, so this confluence then is made up of subterranean water and surface water and represents the East-West River. At the time that this great event takes place and is finally settled, we have the 2 great rivers and so forth. At that point, Ichita, Ichina will begin a northern migration. And anybody that's of a like light and so forth is welcome to join that northward procession and to be a part of the new, what they call the New Jerusalem. And believe it or not, they use the word Jerusalem. Now, simultaneously with that, accompanying him and his on-foot northern procession and migration are 2 barges, which will be, of course, in accompaniment of him and his movement north. And on those 2 barges are 2, actually 4 cornerstones, one here, and they are the cornerstones of the new temple of Jerusalem. Now, they will, of course, go northward until such time they come in the vicinity of, the great East-West River, and then they will turn eastward and follow that particular river. Meanwhile, Ichita, Ichina moves northward until such time he comes in contact with the East-West River himself. And there, he and his peoples and that spiritual procession who follows him will await the arrival of the barges. And when they rendezvous, then they will move together eastward until they come to the junction of the 2 great rivers, the north-south, east-west rivers. At that point, Ichita, Ichina will call a halt, and he will send a scouting party up the east coast, or not the east coast, but the east bank of this north-south river. They are to go until such time they come upon a white stone, huge in nature, which will be on the left bank of this great river. And at that point, they will come back and report to Ichita, Ichina. And Ichita, Ichina then will move up. He will then lay the cornerstones for what they call the new temple of Jerusalem. And that allegedly, according to Indian prophecy, will be the beginning of the new world. Now, you can do what you want with that. That is the ultimate Indian prophecy. I think it's in contradiction to some of the other things I say, but it's another piece of the puzzle, and it's there for you to accept or to solve, whatever you wish. And the Mormons happen to believe that this thing's going to take place in Salt Lake City. That's interesting, isn't it? When, of course, they have their headquarters in Missouri. Yeah, it's a White Rock. But they do believe that it's going to be in Salt Lake City in Utah someplace. That's where they will find it in the final configuration of the planet. Trying to think of other things that might be in there that would be of interest to you. I think that's about it, really. The next time that I give this presentation in town, I will go a little bit more in depth of the great one called East College and all. Yes, a question?
With that change going back to that position for the United States, is that in line with the original blueprint of protection, would you say?
The original blueprint of what?
The original design blueprint of protection before all the other changes started occurring and shaping the plan of the state considered.
I don't know. I don't think I can honestly answer that.
You mentioned that everything would be going back to its original, state of protection.
Yeah. Well, of course, this is, what I've said is that this will be the ultimate. This will be the state of protection we're reaching for. Yeah, it did. And the fact of the matter is, as I said earlier, it does exist within the hollow earth. And they're much older than we are. We have to assume that we came from the hollow earth. Yeah, the hollow becomes the outer, not the inner. The inner is separate and apart from the hollow. And I make a very strong distinction there when I present these two subjects. The hollow earth is very sacred. You have many elements of both good and bad in the inner earth. The focal point for the inner earth is, of course, the great city of Agartha. And supposedly the ruler of all earth is the king of Agartha. And the Tibetans and many of the people in Mongolia in that particular section fear this greatly. The Dalai Lama, for instance, has a very working knowledge and familiarity with Agartha. And an interesting thing, some years ago I was reading a book, long out of print again. I love to get books like that. And there was a Russian nobleman who was making a trek through Tibet and Mongolia and places like that. And it was in a very primitive, everything was in a very primitive state. And he was going along on camels and horses at that time. And all of a sudden, everything froze. The horses, the camels, the people, the riders immediately jumped off of their mounts and bent to the ground in supplication and praying and mumbling and all that. Even the animals stood in a position of terror, or they knelt down as the men did, and in a state of subjection. And he said that he felt this awesome, awesome power that was coming ostensibly from the earth. And so afterwards, in a very guarded way, he asked these people, what was it? At first, they were very reluctant in telling them, and then they finally told him that they were in contact with the spirit of the inner earth of that ancient king of Agartha, and that anybody who did not pay homage to him would immediately die. And so therefore, not fearing death or want to fear death and so forth, they immediately went to a state of supplication. So there is something to that inner earth, and of course, I do talk about it in more detail when I give it. I talk about the Deiros, the Teros, and of course the Gartha, and many other things. Yes? I can't, honey, I can't hear you. Okay, yeah. Yeah. Right. Does everybody understand the principle of the hollow earth? You know, to refute the fact that there is a hollow earth, I think is rather foolish. When I was a boy, and of course I was milking cows when I was 4 years old on the farm, and I used to carry the milk from our milking to what we called the spring house. We didn't have ice boxes or refrigerators back in the days, but we had spring houses. You had a little spring which was very cold. That water flowed through the spring house itself, kept it cool. But as I would carry the milk, sometimes a half a bucket or a full bucket, or even water, I would take it like this, you know, start swinging it, and then I would go over my head like this, and I'd watch that, as I'd get it up here, I'd watch that milk, I'd watch that hole begin to develop into the center of it, you know. Now, I didn't realize what I was doing, centrifugal force at that time, but that's also applicable to every planet within God's creation. As they spin into their final conclusion or state of settlement and so forth, the mass goes around to the exterior, and finally when it comes to rest, you've got what we would know as a hollow space. So it makes a lot of sense to me that there would be a hollow earth here and elsewhere. There's a couple of fantastic books if you'd like to get them and read them, and they're on the, you can buy them through the bookstores. Get one called The Smoky God. It'll blow your mind. And it's about the journey of a father and son who I believe they were Norwegian, either Norwegian or Swedish. And they inadvertently strayed into the hollow earth. Now, there's countless peoples and experiences that are related to the finding of the hollow earth. Why is it, for instance, that the animals, when winter comes, why is it that they go north instead of south? The further north you go, the milder the climate becomes. When you get to the extremity of the north, there's a totally different temperature, which is almost temperate or warmer in nature. The foxes and the lemmings and the many other animals who live in the north don't migrate south, they go north. Why is it that ships, when they're going in the northernmost seas, all of a sudden see an iceberg, and the icebergs have different hues and colors, and upon close examination you find out that this is pollen from plants? Where does it come from? You know, where do icebergs come from? We say it comes from the rain. But if you look into the mysteries of the hollow earth, you'll find out that they actually take place somewhere in the vicinity of the hollow earth in one of those four great rivers which I was talking about. This one here, that east-west river. Many, many interesting phenomena about the hollow earth, and it's another one I'd love to teach. Okay, we've gone 10 minutes over time. I would like to take this opportunity quickly to ask you if you have any questions on anything I've covered today. And then if not, we're going to bring this to a close. Yes, Doris.
On the hollow earth that you were talking about, is this that actually the center of the earth?
Yes, it's the center of the earth.
What about volcanoes?
Well, volcanoes, I wish I had my charts with me. Volcanoes are only to be found in certain places, the igneous matter upon the surface of the earth. Now, what's not commonly known is that there is a line of division between the outer earth and the hollow earth itself. There's 800 miles of thickness from the exterior into the hollow earth itself. There's a subdivision at 400 miles. In the crust, right. And there are ways around that. The ancients, of course, the Indians know ways in there, the Tibetans know ways, and so forth. And some of these passageways not only lead to Agartha, but they lead directly into the hollow earth. Now the thing is that they have a built-in safety mechanism, and that's that 400-mile mark. And unless you know the secrets of that, of course, you cannot negotiate it. The ancients, or some of the modern Indians and Aboriginal type peoples like the Eskimos and so forth, Tibetans and Mongolians and what have you, will tell you, for those of them who have made it that far, there are animals of prehistoric nature, there's men and what have you, who are floating in a state of suspended animation in there, who have died because they have no way of escaping from that trap or entrapment.
Okay, another question pertaining to the course of
Pertaining to what?
scientific upgrade.
Uh-huh.
What about the human gravitational force the Earth has a center? For example, if you go down in the diving suit, you only go so far before pressure will actually crush you. So the descendants can get closer to the Earth.
There are apparently ways to circumvent it. I don't know. I've never done it. I couldn't answer that question fully. Yeah, I'm a scuba diver myself. I've gone down to hundreds of feet, you know, and I know the pressure you're talking about. I know coming out of it many times that my face mask was full of mucus and matter from my sinus, cupful for that matter. So I know what pressure can do to you, and gravity. So I've experienced it all, either in flight or as a deep sea diver. And but there's many inexplicables, and the Indians and others who have negotiated this say that it is safe and you can do it.